Hello, if you want to watch exclusive lemon content on What If Naruto, then go to my Boosty. The first link in the description here contains such hot stories for adults, such as What If Naruto was a daddy for Sarada, or Kushina and Mikoto vulgar Naruto mommies. Follow the link and enjoy. I'm waiting for you.
The casualties on both sides were huge, and the war seemed endless for those who participated or were involved in it. Several small hidden ninja villages were completely wiped out, including the secret and feared village of Romolino, located on a small chain of islands off the coast of Tierra del Fuego. The village, although small, was well known for its sealing techniques and powerful ninjas. Thus, when they allied with the village of Konoha in the Great War, the great villages of Iwekumo, two of the 5 most powerful villages of the elemental nations, allied to destroy the village with a force of such magnitude without precedents, including the most powerful ninjas of each village, known as the Hidden Shadows, or they gathered almost half of their combined fleets and set sail, while their spies among the Konoha forces made them believe that they would attack the northern front of Tierra del Fuego to snatch any possible support that could be sent to Yuzu. In the face of such a force, even the powerful defensive sealing techniques that the Whirlpool village had established to prevent the docking of any ship on its shores were surpassed. Using powerful land-based ninja techniques, the attackers built an artificial harbor over the deep reefs, where Yuzo had placed his seals to create his defenses. The siege lasted for a week, and the losses of the attacking forces were such that, when they finally won the battle, and all the members of the village were killed in combat, even the children were killed or sneaked out of the village with his servants and disappeared to the ends of the world. The attackers were only able to fill 1/10 of the ships with which they arrived. A year later, the 4 Okage, known as the Yellow Flash for his incredible speed technique, put an end to the war by defeating more than 400 enemy ninjas in a single battle with his signature technique. The enemy villages quickly asked for peace, and the war ended, with Konoha as the praised victor, and the Whirlpool sacrifices forgotten by all but a few souls who managed to evade the destruction. This story tells the story of one of those survivors and his quest to restore the glory and legacy of life from his native village to its former glory. Nobunaga Kage, better known lately by his name from the bingo book, The Shadow of Yuzu, was walking with a firm and slow step through the small village on the outskirts of Inokuni. He hadn't been in the country in almost 5 years, and rightly so. He was still considered a missing ninja from the Whirlpool village, despite his non-existence, and as one of the only survivors of the other famous ninja village of Yuzu, or the Hidden Village of the Whirlpool, as it was commonly known. His knowledge of Yuzu jutsu and sealing techniques were attractive prizes for the smaller villages, and even the Big 5 wouldn't turn down the opportunity if he was captured by their ninjas and demanded information. Putting these morbid thoughts aside, he headed for the door of the city hall, which served as both a residence and a job for the mayor and his administrative assistants. The room also contained the wanted posters and arrest warrants, which was how he managed lately. Criminals and bandits had no chance, and the pay was decent. Upon entering, he found some Konoha shinobi there, dressed for a mission, and the leader of the 4 was asking for information to the mayor of the village. They were all chunin and relatively young, so he didn't have to worry about being seen. The descriptions in the bingo book were vague and confusing, with only one picture of him from his genin days, and none of them were old enough to have fought with him 20 years ago. So he passed by them and went to the board, which he examined with reluctance. There seemed to be no new rewards, and I knew that the ones that were in force were obsolete. I had already completed most of them, and had taken them to other villages. His keen ear caught the words of one of the departing chunin, and it left him paralyzed like a word he believed would never be mentioned in trivial conversations again. "We'd better find those bandits fast. The last thing I want to miss is the Uzumaki hunt, the best thing about the festival on October 10th, watching the demon crush." He was interrupted by a punch to the solar plexus that sent him to the ground in a daze. Kage was already dealing the next blow, a debilitator to the knee, shattering the bone easily with a chakran-fused blow. The 2 remaining chunin were reacting, surprised by the attack on their own territory, so to speak, by an unknown shinobi. The shortest of them was looking in his crib bag, and when Cage gave him a spinning kick with enough force to send him through the open door into the hallway and skidding down the street, flailing helplessly. The latter managed to draw the sword from his waist and attacked Cage, cutting a large gash in his side. He flashed an arrogant smile for an instant, only to turn into shock as Cage dissolved into what could only be described as shadows, before a blow to the back of his head knocked him unconscious almost casually at the hands of the true Cage, who had emerged from his own shadow. The one with the injured knee was looking for a crib and another weapon in his bag when, suddenly, Cage appeared in front of him. A terrifying mask of shadows clawing at him and reaching for him, with tiny faces of horror and terror fluttering by. She as if there were souls trapped inside, trying to escape. "Where is the Uzumaki?" The voice was dark and promised an eternity of pain and suffering, but that didn't stop El Chunin from trying to be brave. "To hell with your demon, you're just like the brat. Konoha will take care of both." He interrupted himself with a scream as Cage twisted his mangled knee. "Tell me, or your friends will die screaming in front of you." As if to prove it, one of the other Chunin moaned in obvious pain, and the man decided it would be better to talk. "The brat Uzumaki is in Konoha there. I told you what you wanted to know, now leave us alone." Cage growled again, tempted to hurt the men even more, just because of what they had discussed before his intervention. The phrase Uzumaki hunt sounded barbaric at best, and what was the point of the repeated references to demons? But regardless of with notations of such words, the fact that a member of the Uzumaki house might be alive was not something he could ignore. And if this hunt was on the 10th of the month, he had less than 2 days to reach Konoha, which, moreover, dodging patrols and infiltrating Konoha's precious security systems would be no easy task. With that in mind, he performed the Shushin Jutsu without hand seals, such was his experience with the Jutsu, and disappeared among turbulent shadows that jumped up from the ground to claim him, leaving Kono's team dejected and a mayor terrified that he was hiding behind his desk in case the mysterious shinobi decided he wanted to come after him. Time jumped 2 days. Location with Oa Naruto ran as fast as he could, something he was used to lately. Knowing what day it was, she did her best to return to the orphanage on time, but the matron locked the doors while running, claiming that she stops spending the night outside would make him more punctual. The harsh reality was that she didn't like him, like most of the citizens of Konoha, although he wasn't sure why. And none of them would tell him anything else that he had killed their families and was a terrible demon, which it was pointless, as I knew I hadn't killed anyone. Although this knowledge was the only constant he could remember in the 11 years of survival he had achieved so far. Not that it mattered, he thought wryly as he dodged another onslaught from a villager, pulling into a side street that he knew narrowed a lot halfway so that only one person could pass comfortably. The crowd following him was closing in, although he knew that he had managed to escape for now by diving through the straight, ending with a somersault that made him stand up and run, while the point in question was jammed with people who I was trying to go through it, or at the same time to reach it. Taking advantage of the precious time he had been given, he headed for the slums. The people there were much nicer to him, despite his generally dishonest occupations. None of them had raised their hands to him, and they even hid him on occasions when the crowd got too big. Big so he could escape. Just when he thought he was about to make it, something slammed into him with the force of a cannonball, crashing him into the street wall with a scream of pain as he broke 2 ribs. Standing next to him, there was a man in a ninja uniform and bulletproof vest. From Chunin. A growl could be seen on his face as he raised a short sword over his head. The devil thinks he can escape, doesn't he? Not today. Feel free to shout, you'll enjoy it much more. Hugh. The man was interrupted when he saw that a sword similar to the one in was stuck in his abdomen. Behind him stood a figure that seemed shrouded in darkness itself. The bloody sword dissolved into the same shadows as he lowered his hand. The crowd had taken advantage of this time to walk down the corridor and was approaching cautiously down the street. Seeing the injured Chunin on the ground, his murmurs became more worried and urgent. The hooded figure ignored them. Instead, he knelt down and took his hand to Naruto's wounds. A green light, like the one the kind men at the hospital used to heal him, was emanating from his hand. The voice took him by surprise, and would have frightened him if the man had not saved him, and was not already healing him of his broken bones. "Are you the Uzumaki they call Naruto?" Naruto nodded hesitantly, and was surprised when the man extended his free hand and motioned for him to take it. "I am Nobunaga Kage, an ally of your clan for many years. Take my hand, and we will leave here to a safe place." Naruto couldn't believe it. This man knew about his family. Without thinking for a second longer, she reached out and grabbed as much of the man's big hand as possible with her small fingers. Everything turned black for an instant before she met the man in the room of her orphanage. Even though it was empty, it was something he could say was his. The man in the cape was rummaging through his cloak, while Naruto finished getting his bearings. He jumped to his feet and made his best bow before expressing himself. Thanks for coming, Kage-san. I was in a big mess before you got here. And you were saying you knew something about my family. Is it true?" Kage pulled a small scroll out of his cloak as he nodded. "It was Naruto, but first I need to verify that you are a blood Uzumaki. Not just an orphan with an unfortunate name. I don't want you to get your hopes up unnecessarily." Naruto nodded, understanding. He was already used to the number of times he had been given good news to then come to nothing. Although the fact that the man was testing him before telling him something fake was new. "How are we going to prove it, Kage-san? I mean, even Okage Gigi claimed that he didn't know who my parents were and that there was no good way to find out, so what's your plan?" Kage paused when he heard the word Okage, but recovered quite quickly. "This scroll is sealed with the blood of the Uzumaki. If you are more than a quarter Uzumaki, it should open up by putting a little of your blood on it." Naruto smiled, beaming. It was an opportunity to find out if he belonged to a clan, a way to get revenge on all those idiots at the academy who said that he was nothing but a clan. Good thing it's a slow waste. He reached out his hand, wiped some blood from his still bleeding lip, and placed it against the red seal of the scroll. Nothing happened for a moment, and Naruto was about to sigh in disappointment when the seal glowed blue, and a complex inscription became visible around the scroll, and then the seal came off. Naruto, overflowing with joy, began to jump with excitement. He was a real Uzumaki, whatever that meant. He stopped when he heard Kage laughing to himself, and the sound turned into laugh when the man denied with the head. "I have spent almost 2 decades searching everywhere, in the dungeons of the elemental nations, for even the rumor of a survivor of the Uzumaki clan, and yet, during all this time, there was one so close to home. In the land of our allies. Akami likes to play with me." Shaking his head once more, he fell silent, and then became serious. "But now, young heir, you must make a decision. Do you want to learn about your clan and our way of being a ninja?" The man couldn't have said anything other than maybe offering ramen to pique Naruto's interest. "Of course yes, are you going to teach me, Kaie-sensei?" The man nodded, but spoke again. "I will, but for that I must take you to your clan's house, which is far from Konoha. This means that you would have to leave with me for a year or two so that you can learn everything you can before coming back here and becoming ninja. I guess you want to live up to the legacy of your clan." Naruto nodded. If your clan were ninja, it would be fair to learn about them. But what about Okage Gigi? I'm not sure he wants me to leave the village without him finding out. A sadistic smile was drawn on Kai's face as he stood up. "Don't worry about that, Naruto. I've known your Gigi for a long time, so I'll leave him a clone who will talk to him about it. I'm sure everything will be fine, so get your batteries up." Naruto cocked his head, confused, and then nodded. If Kage knew Gigi and said he would be fine, everything would be fine in his books. Without further delay, he ran around the room, collecting his few belongings from the hiding places he had created. He was going to learn and become an amazing ninja. He was great. Time jump, 30 minutes and Rusensel. Toby rushed to the orphanage, hoping that the report she had received from a breathless hospital assistant was incorrect. According to reports, an unknown man had appeared during the festival, injured a Chunin, and kidnapped Naruto, before disappearing into an unknown location in an instant of darkness. This coincided with the report of a Konoha team that was sent to a village southwest of Konoha. where a man of similar description had questioned them about the child before disappearing in the same way, just 2 days earlier. The distance he had covered alone made it an impressive feat. When he ran into Naruto's room, he found it empty. All of Naruto's little hiding places open to the world's view, empty of their contents. He extended his senses, and upon finding the hidden chakra source, he moved instinctively, throwing a cradle at the man's throat. Before he could even begin to react, intending to kill himself by shooting at massive levels. However, the man in front of him seemed calm behind his bone-white mask, and started talking as if they were sitting having a few drinks instead of being threatened at knife point. The Uzumaki heir has already left, and I do not intend to harm him, Irizen, which is better than what I can say about your village. Besides, you'd better put the kunai away. I am just a shadow who is here to discuss what will happen to the heir and his inheritance. Sarutobi glared at him while, using her chakra sense, she verified that he was indeed a clone and that the real one was not nearby. I don't trust the word of the missing ninja Nobunaga, especially one who was exiled from Yuzu by order of the last Uzumaki leader. For all I know, you will try to turn the boy against us, or worse, kill him in a petty revenge. The mask foamed and turned black, an obvious sign of the man's aversion to Sarutobi's accusations. You know better than anyone that I wouldn't raise a sword against the Uzumaki clan, not with my clan's honor at stake. I don't hold a grudge against them, and I wish to see them get stronger again. My exile is insignificant. In comparison, the man accepted the room for a moment while Sarutobi watched his slightly restrained anger, as he remembered the blood debt the Cage clan owed to the Uzumaki for having saved them during an ambush before the establishment of ninja villages, when clans traveled alone, and were often targeted by rival clans in an attempt to eliminate them. The rival clans of the Cage had united and attacked at noon, the worst time for the techniques and lineage of the Cage. And with the added difficulty of protecting non-combatants, the members of the Cage clan were in grave danger. Then, from among the trees, the Uzumaki warriors emerged, their predominantly red hair waving in the wind, as they sowed death among the clan's attackers, forcing them to retreat quickly, leaving more of the half-killed or captured. To the surprise of the Cage clans, the Uzumaki did not torture or humiliate their captured enemies, as many clans did at that time, turning them into servants or, even worse, into sexual objects for reproduction, as I knew they made some of the most barbaric clans. Instead, the Uzumaki tended to the wounded on both sides quickly, and then sent one of the captured members back to his clan, with a negotiating offer for his return. Soon after, the Uchiha and Senju clans would settle together in Konoha, making people believe that they were starting the era that would give rise to the great ninja villages, but in reality it was the Cage, Uzumaki and the two clans they had fought with that day, the ones who formed the village of Yuzu almost 2 months earlier, with the 3 clans pledging allegiance to the Uzumaki and the village named after them, as they were the most numerous ninja of the clans, and the other clans saw the Uzumaki as the best to run the village, as they did not have any possible history with the other clans that could cause tensions in the future of the. But that aside, there was still the fact that Naruto was now in the hands of a ninja outside Konoha who was unaware of the boy's burden, not even his lineage. However, even if you don't hurt him, it's a fact that you are one of the most wanted ninjas of the elemental nations, and the village of Iwa craves your head almost as much as that of the 4th Hokage. The last thing Naruto needs is that level of hatred directed towards him at this age. Cage chuckled wryly and looked at the Hokage in disbelief. You say that when they chase the child all over the village, they exclude him from the orphanage that he considers his home, for no reason, and threaten him with physical harm. No, actually that's not the right sentence, it was a real torture, at the hands of your own ninja. I think to be with me and deal with some other hunter Ev. Gloria will give him a good rest. The man stopped walking and chuckled. Not that it matters if you approve or not, the truth is that we've already left the village. And you know what happens to hunter ninjas who chase me, so I wouldn't bother. What I want to know the most is when can I send Naruto back for him to become a ninja. Sarutobi watched him in surprise. What do you mean? I thought you were going to teach him the way of the Yuzu. Cage shook his head and cleared up. I will teach him just that, and all the Uzumaki knowledge I got to know in the meantime. But I refuse to let the Uzumaki just disappear. They must be reborn somewhere, and Konoha is as good a place as any to do it. Despite the feelings of civilians, it is better than Kumo or Iwa. Therefore, he must be a Konoha ninja, not a Ronin or a mercenary. Sarutobi relaxed. Kage wouldn't be able to reveal any of the secrets. He still didn't want Naruto to know about his inheritance, nor give him knowledge about his tenant, but at the same time, he would train him as his mother would have wanted. And therefore he would return as a ninja much stronger. There are 2 years left until his age group enters the last academy year, so you have until then to train him. I hope he will return in early June of that year. I also want a report every 6 months, and you need to stay away from Kumo Iwa. They are the ones who would take the most advantage of you having a student to try to use it against you. Sarutobi felt the years slipping away from him as he dictated the terms of this rather forced training trip. He was no longer the old man, forced to return to work after the tragic events of the night of Naruto's birth. That led to the death of his successor, but the commander of the Konoha army, the feared Kamino Shinobi. Kage nodded. Fair enough, and I'll be around after that. Your security is so bad they couldn't stop me anyway. See you in 2 years, man. And with that, the clone left, obviously on his way to inform his master. One of his Ambu guards appeared from under his genjutsu hideout. We followed him, Okage-sama. He saluted and shook his head. There were other things to do. No, Bor, we won't. Naruto will be safe with him. In the meantime, I want you to round up the orphanage staff. Obviously, someone has been watching me, lying about Naruto's well-being. And that man from the hospital, take him to Ibiki as soon as he recovers. I think he has falsified his statement about what happened between him and Nobunaga. 2 of their ambus left, and less than a minute later, they were replaced by 2 more members. It wouldn't do any good to leave him without vigilance with a rogue ninja who was possibly still in the village. With a sigh, he walked away at a calmer pace this time. There was still paperwork to be done before I could return home. Hopefully, she would be able to see her daughter before she went to bed that night. Well, that's it. Have fun, guys and girls. Yuzu's last time in the shadows is 2 years away from his age group entering the final year of academy. So you have until then to train him. I hope he will return in early June of that year. I also want a report every 6 months, and you need to stay away from Kumo Iwa. They are the ones who would take the most advantage of you having a student to try to use it against you. Sarutobi felt the years slipping away from him as he dictated the terms of this rather forced training trip. He was no longer the old man, forced to return to work after the suits events on the night of Naruto's birth that led to the death of his successor, but the commander of the Konoha army, the feared Kamino Shinobi. Kaguya felt. Fair enough, and I'll be around after that. Your security is so bad they couldn't stop me anyway. See you in 2 years, man. And with that, the clone left, obviously on his way to inform his master. One of his Ambu guards appeared from under his genjutsu hideout. We followed him, Okage-sama. Sarutobi shook his head. There were other things to do. No, Bor, we won't. Naruto will be safe with him. In the meantime, I want you to round up the orphanage staff. Obviously, someone has been lying to me about Naruto's well-being. And that man from the hospital, take him to Ibiki as soon as he recovers. I think he has falsified his statement about what happened between him and Nobunaga. 2 of their ambus left, and less than a minute later, they were replaced by 2 more members. It wouldn't do any good to leave him unguarded with a rogue ninja who was possibly still in the village. With a sigh, he walked away at a calmer pace this time. There was still paperwork to be done before I could return home. Hopefully, she would be able to see her daughter before she went to bed that night. And now, the new chapter, time jump, 2 years change of person Katezu, Chunin from Konoha Katezu stamped the entry forms. For what was supposed to be the 1000th merchant caravan of the day. His partner Izumo had used his chakra senses to search for possible infiltrated ninjas among the group, in addition to physically searching the wagons for contraband or illegal materials. It was not a difficult task, and only occasionally they would find some missing Genin-level ninja who came looking for. So about their past, and taking care of them was the responsibility of the Ambu patrols that covered the walls. However, he liked to think that they were useful, making sure that the doors of Konoha will never be left unprotected or vulnerable. He was about to lean back in his chair when, suddenly, Izumo stiffened and looked towards the road. Such a reaction wouldn't have made anyone else raise an eyebrow, but Kotetsu had been working with Izumo for almost 10 years. And they both knew each other's little reactions, to the point that they needed nothing more than a glance to transmit plans and conversations. Kotetsu stood up and was at Izumo's side the next instant, his hand on his kunai bag, while he was secretly joking. "What's the matter, Izumo? Is there a group of heises coming?" Izumo's gaze didn't deviate, even to answer Kotetsu's humorous question, and Kotetsu was about to ask again when Izumo finally spoke. "Someone is approaching, yes, but his chakra is off the scale, and it's as wild as anything I've ever seen." Those words made Kotetsu straighten up and start scanning the horizon, at the same time unfolding his chakra. Yes, I knew it would be a small waste, but it was the fastest way to alert the nearest Ambu squadron. If this man's chakra was as powerful as Izumo claimed, they would need reinforcements quickly. After a minute, a figure appeared on the horizon, and unconsciously, both Izumo and Kotetsu shuddered, getting ready. After a few seconds, Kotetsu relaxed as he perceived the features of the figure with his keen eyesight. "Izumo, he's just a kid. I'm sure you just read his chakra." He was interrupted by feeling the chakra of the boy who had just appeared next to them. With a stealthy and fast movement that, if Kotetsu hadn't felt it, he wouldn't have believed it even if it had been told to him in a bar. Kotetsu turned defensively at the same time as Izumo, drawing their weapons. As they were presented with the smiling, formerly familiar face of the resident container, dressed with simple brown clothes and a voluminous black cape. The boy then spoke as if he had just approached them, instead of sneaking up on them in a threatening way. "Hello, Naruto Uzumaki. I request to enter the village of Konoha. I think the Hokage is waiting for me." "Wait a minute, why are they targeting me?" The newly revealed blonde man raised his hands in an appeasing manner, while Kotetsu and Izumo had Kuna and up and ready to fight. "The Hokage is expecting you in 3 days, Uzumaki-san. That's why we hadn't notified the guards of your possible arrival yet." The voice made the three of them look towards the door, where they found a squad of 3 ambus in a relaxed attitude, led by an ambu with a cat mask, who looked at the boy with obvious disapproval, while he scratched the back of his neck in a reflexive act. "Ah, I knew I forgot something when I decided to get a little faster, Gomen to Seineko-san. Should I leave and come back in 2 days?" Kotetsu almost lost his composure in surprise at Uzumaki's absurd question, and he saw that he wasn't the only one, as Izumo's disbelief was much more evident. Neko shook her head in disbelief and replied with no less humorous tone. "No, you can come in now. Naruto, Hokage-sama, he will be surprised, but I guess he will be delighted. The last thing I need is for you to be around making the guards nervous for the next 2 days. They told me you were bringing someone else with you." Naruto shook his head. "Kage-sensei has gone to look for other information he has collected. I am sure he will come back soon. See you at the tower. I doubt Konoha has changed enough to make me lose my sense of direction." Neko shook her head once more, something Kotetsu had an intuition that people would do a lot more in the future because of life. To the blonde boy's actions, especially with his new and seemingly powerful powers. "I'm afraid you'll have to come with me to see it, Naruto. The other Ambu have not been informed of your arrival, and your chakra will make them nervous, something you do not need on your first day back." Naruto shrugged his shoulders and gave him a wide smile. "Well, you better lead me, Neko-chan. I didn't want him to leave you behind." Neko just chuckled and jumped out, followed closely by Naruto. The other 2 ambus disappeared in Shuzens, returning to their patrol routine, leaving the 2 puzzled Chunin without the slightest explanation of what happened. Izumo spoke first, in a low voice, as if he expected to be observed and heard by invisible forces. "Kotetsu, I think things are going to get a lot more chaotic around here again, and I don't think any infiltrated ninja have nothing to do with that." Kotetsu couldn't help but agree with Izumo, although he didn't express it. The container of the Kyuubi had left as a simple orphan with no skills, and hated by people, and now he had returned, without at least his personality seeming to have changed. But now, with considerable abilities that surpassed those of a normal ninja, any villager stupid enough to attack him would be the one who would be in grave danger, not the other way around. Interestingly, Kitezu wasn't too bothered by the idea. In fact, it would be a good way to deal with several of the more idiotic members of the civilian population, who were causing problems for everyone, not just Naruto. The more he thought about it, the better it sounded, and he let out a cheerful whistle, ignoring the strange look he threw at him, and smoked. I would tell him later, and he would probably find it as funny as he did. Yes, Naruto was back, and all hell would probably break loose at any moment. Earlier, in the shadows of Izumo spoke first, in a low voice, as if he expected to be observed and heard by invisible forces. Kitezu, I think things are going to get a lot more chaotic around here again, and I don't think any infiltrated ninja has anything to do with it. Kotetsu couldn't help but agree with Izumo, although he didn't express it. The container of the Kyuubi had left as a simple orphan with no skills, and hated by people, and now he had returned, without at least his personality seeming to have changed. But now, with considerable abilities that surpassed those of a normal ninja, any villager stupid enough to attack him would be the one who would be in grave danger, not the other way around. Interestingly, Kitezu wasn't too bothered by the idea. In fact, it would be a good way to deal with several of the more idiotic members of the civilian population, who were causing problems for everyone, not just Naruto. The more he thought about it, the better it sounded, and he let out a cheerful whistle, ignoring the strange look Izumo threw at him. I would tell him later, and he would probably find it as funny as he did. Yes, Naruto was back, and all hell would probably break loose at any moment. New chapter. It begins. Time jump, 20 minutes. Change of person, and Ruzen Sarutobi, third cage of Konoha Sarutobi, looked up from his work, slightly surprised to feel the speed of the signatures of chakra that they were getting closer, but he smiled warmly when Neko and Naruto appeared through the window. The pace at which Neko was traveling, and more importantly, that which Naruto was following, was impressive. Certainly greater than that which any of his current genin could reach at such a distance without running out of breath, although he supposed that Naruto had always had an advantage in physical training thanks to his lodger, so it was to be expected now that he had received proper one-on-one training. Looking more closely with his experienced eyes, Sarutobi noticed the firm stance Naruto adopted as he straightened up, that of a warrior now, in contrast, of the boy who had left with Kage 2 years earlier. Naruto wiped his face once, then smiled at Sarutobi, in a way that would have made him want to respond, even if he hadn't already. Long time no see, Gigi, I see the paperwork is as bad as ever. Do you want to quit and eat ramen? Sarutobi laughed to himself, as Neko attacked like a coiled snake, and Naruto staggered at a blow to the ear with a scream. However, Naruto had tried to dodge the blow that Sarutobi noticed, so his reflexes and sense of danger were developed at the same level as his speed, which was always useful, as it meant that a fighter wouldn't react in a way that his body couldn't follow. Nor would he move at a speed that made his reactions much less efficient because of his pace. Neko spoke angrily to the blonde in front of him, her hand still outstretched and ready, despite the fact that the rest of her posture was strictly professional in front of her leader during such a strange meeting. Naruto-san, show respect to Okage-sama. Just because you've been out and about with a member of your clan doesn't mean everyone should be treated like family. Sarutobi raised his hand, silencing the rest of his speech. She had to admit that she never imagined that Neko would act so motherly in the face of Naruto's actions. The reason why she had become so nervous became apparent a moment later when Naruto spoke, with the face of a freshly kicked kitten. I'm sorry, Neko-chan. It's just that Okage-sama and I have known each other for a long time, so it's like family. And he hasn't scolded me for it yet. I'll try to be less familiar with strangers in the future, Neko-chan. Neko's face mask made her expression indecipherable, but Sarutobi could see from her posture that she was resisting the urge to break down and hit or hug the boy. I wasn't sure which of the two options, and I didn't want to wait to find out which one would be carried out. Speaking before anyone could interrupt him, he stood up at the same time, turning the table around. He's right, Neko. Naruto is like a grandson of mine, although I admit that I can't keep him in the village no matter how hard I try. The laughter at Naruto's stupidity became lighter when he motioned the boy to come over from giving him a hug. It bothered her a little that the guy was now next to her when they met. It seemed that the time of hugs with another member of his close family would soon end. Naruto pulled away with a regretful expression this time, instead of trying to be nice, like he had done to Neko. "I'm sorry, Gigi, but I knew my family and their history, even if I didn't know my parents. And well, now that I think about it, I see that I should have waited to make sure that I talked to you instead of leaving with a stranger. But it was still the best thing I could have done. I have learned a lot with him." At that moment, Sarutobi's gaze turned to Neko. And he knew that she had grasped that this trip contained more than Sarutobi had told anyone who had not been present that night, even one of his best agents, who had proved his loyalty to him over and over again. "I know you did. Reading your letters confirmed to me that I won't be leaving, but where is Cage? I wanted to offer him asylum here in Konoha, so that he could rest and continue helping you." Naruto shrugged his shoulders disdainfully, unconsciously searching for a small pendant on his cloak. "I'm sorry, Gigi. Cage said he had heard about a red-haired girl in the grassland with Uzumaki features who was raised an orphan. So he went to find out if she was an Uzumaki too. I guess he will be busy at least the next few months." Sarutobi sighed. Cage had been a loose truck even when he was tied to Yuzu. He imagined that even if he joined the village upon arrival, he would be like his former student Jiraiya, who spent years outside the village taking care of its information networks and building a network of favors and agents to help Konoha in case of another war breaking out. So there's nothing we can do about it right now except wait for his return. Now, Naruto, while you've been away, I've been researching the orphanage, and I've discovered that they treated not only you, but also other children, with the care that was required of them. Therefore, I have taken you out of the orphanage with some of the money that I have confiscated from them. They were preparing your new apartment building, but due to your premature return, it's not ready yet. Therefore, you will be my guest for the next 2 nights. I know my daughter Ri. She has missed your antics these last 2 years. Naruto's smile flashed, such was its intensity. Thank you, Gigi, that's great news. I would love to meet the rest of my unofficial family. Saruto turned to his teeth, and then asked with a slightly more serious tone, where are your belongings? I guess Cage likes to travel light, but leaving you alone with the clothes you're wearing wouldn't be like him. Naruto looked confused, and then shook his head, understanding. I guess he didn't tell you then, it wouldn't surprise me. Sometimes he forgets the most important thing. Cage has been teaching me what he knows about seals, and when we were in the ruins of Yuzu, he accessed several warehouses that had been hidden enough to survive the assault and the attention of the scavengers. These contained more blood seal scrolls that we were able to access, which taught us both more about the subject than Cage could have hoped to teach me. So all my belongings, as well as those scrolls, are sealed in various places on my clothes that only I can access. Sarutobi nodded, secretly dizzy from the thought that had occurred to him while Naruto was talking. As much as he tried not to force Naruto to follow the path of a child, a way of life that Sarutobi had always advocated had to be chosen by the individual, not forced on her as they were in some of the villages. Smaller if they had a lineage or skill that was useful for the power and prosperity of the villages. He could not help but be sure that the Uzumaki seals, who had been so advanced that they infiltrated the village undetected. It had been impossible for anyone other than the second Tsuchikage, who had been famous for his skills of infiltration and assassination that were the best in history. He would soon be defending Konoha if Naruto was anything like his clan members when it came to seal skills. Remembering that Neko was still present, and that he would definitely need a report after what he had heard in the office that morning. It was best to fire Naruto so that he could resume the paperwork before it accumulated again without. I realized, as it always happened on days like this. Okay, Naruto, well, I'll let you go to refresh your knowledge about the village and its layout. I need to get on with my job after all, lest I drown after you leave. Naruto laughed at the now familiar joke and nodded understanding. Of course, Gigi, I'll see you tonight. And without waiting, he walked out the front door, greeting a very surprised secretary. Once Sarutobi confirmed with his bodyguards that Naruto was away from the area, he turned to Neko, who was still steadfastly waiting for an order. Easy, Yugao, I have a feeling we have a lot to discuss before I can get back to work. Previously, in Yuzu's shadows, no matter how hard he tried not to force Naruto to follow a girl's path. A way of life that Sarutobi had always championed had to be chosen by the individual, not forced on her as they were. In some of the smaller villages, and they had a lineage or skill that was useful for the power and prosperity of the villages. He could not help but be sure that the Uzumaki seals, which had been so advanced, that infiltrating the village undetected had been impossible even for the second. Tsuchikage, who had been famous for his infiltration and assassination skills due to his unique abilities, would soon be defending Konoha. If Naruto was anything like his clan members when it came to skills with the stamps. Remembering that Neko was still present, and that he would definitely need a report after what he had heard in the office that morning. It was best to fire Naruto so that he could resume the paperwork before it accumulated again without. I realized, as it always happened on days like this. Okay, Naruto, well, I'll leave you. Go to refresh your knowledge about the village and its distribution. I need to get on with my job after all, lest you drown me after you leave. Naruto laughed at the joke, already familiar between them, and nodded, understanding. Of course, Gigi, I'll see you tonight. And without waiting, he walked out the front door, greeting a very surprised secretary. Once Sarutobi confirmed with his bodyguards that Naruto was away from the area, he turned to Neko, who was still steadfastly waiting for an order. Easy, Yugao, I have a feeling we have a lot to discuss first. Before I can get back to work. The Shadows of Yuzu, Chapter 4. Back to school, and hating every minute of it. It didn't take long for Naruto to reconnect with the village. Apart from a change in patrol schedules and the expansion or closure of several high street shops, everything was still the same as when he left. If he had been the same guy as when he left with Cage, he probably would have announced his return with some ostentatious joke. However, among other things that Cage had taught him about life in general, besides being a child, he had gained respect for the idea of anonymity and apathy, instead of angering the villagers from the very beginning. Therefore, the location had informed him which class he would be in when the academy reopened after the summer holidays. He had had limited interaction with the class in question, except for a somewhat childish crush he felt for one of the girls in the class. A civilian named Sakura Runo, whom he met in preschool. That had been quickly forgotten under the tutelage of Cage and the long trips they had made. She was the first person I had found. Surprisingly, I was alone, reading in one of the many parks that covered the interior of the village. She seemed much calmer than he remembered her. But she was definitely not the dazzling beauty that his mind had conjured up when initially remembering her. She was beautiful, no doubt, but her violent tendencies sometimes turned out to be quite unpleasant. And that was putting it mildly. Leaving her, he followed several members of his future class, and, in general, he was disappointed with all of them. Cage had always shown that Naruto was not as powerful as he thought, stating that modesty was the basis of strength. However, at the same time, there were these guys, who prioritized their academy training over their non-ninja friends. Although most guys would have a hard time passing the academic parts of the exams. With her current state, and most of the girls were too busy chasing the last. Uchiha, who interestingly, was also in his class, along with several other great heirs of the Konoha clan. The Great Clans, as they were called by those who lived outside Konoha, comprised the 10 most influential clans in the city. These were the Akimichi clan, the Yamanaka clan, the Nara clan, the Ibrahim clan, the Inzuku clan, the Iuga clan, the Senju clan, the Kurama clan, the Itachi clan, and the Uchiha clan. All with their own ninja techniques or lineages that made them unique and more powerful than those from outside the clans. However, during the last 40 years, 4 of these clans had fallen into decline. Being the Uchi the most recent of them, victim of a bloody massacre. That took place during the first year that Naruto had been out of the country. The massacre was carried out by the heir of the clan, and although the information about what happened that night was, at best, scarce, it was known that the younger brother of the heir, the clan heir, was the only survivor, and that his brother had used his Dojutsu, or eye-linked lineage, called Sharingan, to induce some kind of mental attack in the boy, which left him in the hospital for almost 2 months, delaying his admission to the academy that same year. The Senju clan and the Atak clan were reduced to their last members, and both resisted the council's efforts to force them to start repopulating their numbers. The Kurama clan was in troubled waters in a different way. His lineage was becoming more erratic, to the point that his most talented member, he had been removed from the academy due to losing control of his lineage. The fact that all the other great heirs of the clan were in the same class was interesting news to ponder. For Naruto pondered later as the Uchiha in question entered half an hour earlier and sat in what? That obviously. It was his place, about halfway up the room, next to one of the windows that let in the Konoha sunlight. He was also the first one to arrive, apart from Naruto, of course, who was hidden under a minor genjutsu at the back of the room, and had been there almost an hour before the start of the academy. To make sure you are the first to arrive. He could not cast genjutsu properly due to his terrible chakra control, despite his and Kai's attempts to fix it. Therefore, the genjutsu was created with the brooch of his long jacket that Kage had engraved on him. He only had to supply the chakra to feed the illusion that made those who were looking at him want to look away. In addition to making them forget that they had seen him, a rather ingenious technique, although with a high consumption of chakra. It was almost 5 minutes before the next arrival, a civilian girl who I thought was named Itomi. At that instant, he was surprised to see Lucia put out a book, no less, a suspense thriller, about a group of Black Ops ninjas. During the Third Shinobi War, something he didn't think Lucia would allow herself if he was listening to the girls who were following him. Everything changed, of course, the moment Itomi entered. The book was in Lucia's backpack and disappeared from sight with an impressive speed. Lucia adopted a pensive pose that Naruto seemed to understand as something normal about him. For the next 20 minutes, people came into the room. No one noticed him, not even the Yuga girl, who was worried that he would activate his Dojutsu, the all-seeing Ibikagen, which allowed him to see chakra in a 360 dome around him. Since his genjutsu was overflowing with chakra, he would have noticed it clearly. The classroom finally filled up just a few minutes after 9 a.m. The only gaps were the seats on either side of Naruto. Professor Chunin, whose name was Omino Iruka, whom Naruto had found after doing some research, entered 2 minutes from the end, and stood at the front of the class, obviously waiting for the silence of the children in front of him. After 30 seconds of continuous muttering, Iruka had obviously had enough and suddenly spoke up. Transforming into a giant demonic version of his normal face, his voice loud and scary without having to scream too much so that the class will be silent. Naruto was impressed with such an interesting unsigned genjutsu. Or at least I expected it to be a genjutsu. Otherwise, it was a worrying lineage. This reassured the class, who were staring at the Chunin in stunned silence. Knowing that he now had her undivided attention, Iruka's head returned to its normal size, and he opened the cash register on his desk to check that all the students were present. He called them by their name until he pronounced Sasuke's, and then stopped, looking at the name below with obvious astonishment. Naruto Uzumaki. People looked around confused at the unknown name, although Iruka noticed that Sakura and a couple of the others recognized him. He sighed and withdrew the chakra flow from his bracelet, breaking the genjutsu, and rebelling by getting up and shouting, "Here, Iruka-sensei." He found the reactions to his appearance certainly amusing, and had to restrain his laughter as he saw those around him fall from their seats. For the surprise. Several girls screamed, the boys screamed in a way that they would later describe as manly, and one poor girl fainted. It certainly wasn't the expected reaction from students in their final year of training before becoming battle-ready mercenaries. The only 3 who reacted properly, according to Naruto, were Sasuke, who stood up at the surprise appearance behind him, reaching for his Kuna bag, and in a knee-jerk reaction. However, the surprises for Naruto were Sakura and Jimata. The latter jumped into the gap between the rows as she activated her Yakugan, while the former even threw a cradle and towards him while spinning in his seat. He caught the cradle, and by the ring a few inches from his face serene. Even when Iruka finally relaxed enough to contain his instincts, which had been prompting him to throw a species sword against the intruder. Naruto then left the row of desks and went down the stairs, while the whole class watched him with some apprehension. He stopped in front of Sakura and offered her the kunai, speaking with an indifferent tone. "I think this is yours, Aruno-sen." She grabbed him quickly, blushing slightly as she quickly looked away, embarrassed. An instant later, Naruto returned to his seat with a speed that many of the students at the academy could not follow. Although Iruka was watching him with something akin to distrust and concern. Only by chance did Naruto know why Iruka was looking at him and most of the adults in the village like that. It was during his training with Kaie-sensei in the wilds of the Fire Country. Flashback scene. It had been almost 6 months since the two strange companions traveled through the land of fire. After almost 2 weeks since they left the hidden village, Kage finally confessed that she had technically kidnapped him from Konoha. Naruto took it surprisingly well, as he only tried to go back to the village once, before Kage tied him up and explained that the Hokage had given the green light to the trip as long as Naruto wrote him letters regularly about his training. The question about this announcement had been the subject of the first of those letters to Hokage, and Naruto had only truly calmed down when he received the answer. Courtesy of the Kage spies who regularly came and went from the main ones of advance in the country, detailing in each mail article he sent to the Hokage where he would call next and when, so that the answers could be written in time to be delivered. With that little problem solved, Kage started his training for real. He started with a hard physical training regimen that soon even left Naruto with a somewhat impressive endurance on the verge of failure. Although Naruto had to admit that the results were hard to ignore, after 3 months, Kage declared that his body strength was at the height of a Yuzu graduate ninja, so it was time to work on the other aspects who contributed to the shinobi life. Then, they worked on tactics and knowledge, the history of great nations, and the politics of present-day villages and nations. When Naruto asked him why he needed to learn such things, since they did not help him become a super powerful shinobi, Kage pointed out that the Hokage should know them so as not to accidentally anger a powerful noble or a village and therefore bring the war to his village and his people. Naruto got down to work quickly after that, although he noticed that his difficulties with the material were driving him crazy. Still, they persevered until Kage lost his patience. It wasn't really Naruto's fault that Kage had lost his patience, but trying to teach him something based on books without regular breaks of physical exertion was probably the hardest thing Kage had ever lived through. As concentrated theoretical work was considered impossible, Kage drew up a new training plan. After pondering for almost 2 days, during which he exhausted Naruto with his shadows, a secret technique of his clans that allowed him to create solid clones capable of thinking for themselves and using their chakra to create techniques. Kage decided that it would be a good idea to teach Naruto some basic techniques before developing his shadow technique. These required heavy use of chakra, but all ninjas were known for their higher than normal chakra ability. So even though Kage couldn't use them like he used to, some of his techniques weren't exhausting for him to use regularly. So the next month, he spent teaching Naruto 3 techniques and trying to teach him several more. Naruto adapted like a fish in the water to Kagurumi and Enge, and after an hour, the only thing Kage could tell him to improve the techniques, it was that he used too much chakra to complete the technique, which caused a huge cloud of smoke to erupt when making the change. The flash jutsu, a simple technique that produced a flash of powerful white light when completed, was something that Kage considered vital to learn, although it was never explained why it was so important. It was the cloning jutsu that Naruto had managed to master, and Kage assumed that this was possibly due to the instability of his chakra, whose density changed and deformed from one instant to the next. This in itself was not bad, it just meant that, for such low-cost chakra techniques, it was very difficult not to accidentally overload them. In an attempt to help Naruto master his chakra a little more, as well as to allow Kage some peace, Kage sat him down and instructed him in the art of meditation. It had been a difficult task to accomplish with Naruto's energy levels and his apparent permanent activity, but finally Naruto managed to master the concepts and spent an hour a day calming his chakra, sinking deeper and deeper into the posture. This continued until he finally woke up and found himself not on the field where he and Kage had been training, but in a strange building, almost like a sewer because of the structure, the blue and red pipes that covered the walls, and finally, the water that accumulated on the floor. Looking towards the corridors, he noticed a light shining at one end of the passage and felt some curiosity about what was happening to him, as he had exercised his form chakra. In that cage had taught him to dispel the genjutsu, to no effect. He walked slowly along the path, his feet splashing on the watery ground. He didn't notice any sensation of water splashing on him from the movements he was making, but he ignored it for now. He might understand it better later. When he reached the light, he discovered that it was actually a set of bright bars, easily 100 times his height, and each of the 20 bars, easily twice his width, inscribed with kanji so dense that only by giving a step forward, he could make out that it was they who were shining, and not the whole bar. As he moved forward, something moved in the darkness, in what Naruto a moment later designated as a cage. He had to back up quickly to dodge a giant claw, one of the three that had the huge paw that extended around two of the bars to fit. Straightening up as he turned to observe his attacker, Naruto could not help a shiver that ran down his back as he met the smiling face of a giant red-furred fox, whose eyes were full of amusement and anger. "So close, although you've come to visit me earlier than I thought, so I can be forgiven for not being prepared, right? My little jailer." End of the flashback. That had been one of the scariest experiences in Naruto's short life, and once he revealed it to Kage. Upon managing to get out of what they discovered was his mental escape, the masked man told him not to try to contact him again. He had met Viju containers before, and the more they used the chakra of their Viju, the crazier and more dangerous they seemed to become. Not only to their enemies, but also to their allies and the innocent bystanders who might be at their around when they invoked the chakra of their internals. Another thing Naruto didn't want to happen. It was in the least. He was glad to know at least now why everyone hated him when he was young, and why some still distrusted him now that he had returned. His reflexes interrupted him, shouting that something was coming at him from the front of the class. Without thinking, after being tested repeatedly, he grabbed the offending object and threw it with some chakra in the direction he had come. A rumble was heard, and as he observed what had happened for the first time, he was met with the stunned stares of the entire class. Iruka moved sideways, after narrowly dodging the blackboard he had thrown at Naruto for some reason. The offending object was now embedded in the wall behind the shattered chalkboard, and an eruption of chalk was the only movement for a moment. Scratching the back of his neck, Naruto smiled apologetically, and then spoke quickly. "I'm sorry, Iruka-sensei, did you want something?" Previously, in Shadow Fufuesa had been one of the scariest experiences in Naruto's short life, and once he revealed it to Kage. Upon managing to get out of what they discovered to be his mental escape, the masked man told him not to try to contact him again. He had known Viju containers before, and the more he used, the more crazy and dangerous his Viju chakra seemed to become. Not only to his enemies, but also to his allies, and the innocent bystanders who might be at his around when they invoked the chakra of their internals. Another thing that Naruto didn't want to happen in the least. He was glad to know at least now why everyone hated him when he was young, and why some still distrusted him now that he had returned. His reflexes interrupted him, shouting that something was coming at him from the front of the class. Without thinking, after being tested repeatedly by Kage, he grabbed the offending object and lo, he threw with some chakra in the direction he had come. A rumble was heard, and as he observed what had happened for the first time, he was met with the stunned stares of the entire class. Iruka moved sideways, after narrowly dodging the blackboard he had thrown at Naruto for some reason. The offending object was now embedded in the wall behind the shattered chalkboard, and an eruption of Pisa was the only movement for a moment. Scratching the back of his neck, Naruto smiled apologetically, and then spoke quickly. "I'm sorry, Iruka-sensei, did you want something?" Consequence of an act. After his peculiar way of introducing himself to his classmates, it was not surprising that the class avoided him both inside and outside the classroom. Some of them were probably doing it on their parents' orders, Naruto thought wryly as he made his way to his usual place. In the upper right seat of the classroom, passing by a civilian boy who was glaring at him. The Sandaime law had prevented adults from directly mentioning Naruto's case as the container, but Gigi had obviously underestimated the hatred and ingenuity of a good part of the civilian population. They had carefully and indirectly poisoned the minds of their children against the object of their hatred and fear. And thanks to social pressure, that aversion and evasion had spread through the academy like wildfire before his departure. And his return seemed to have rekindled that hatred, although not to the same levels as before. Although that only explained part of the evasion, Naruto thought as Sakura entered. In the classroom, she looked up to where he was sitting for a moment before realizing he was looking at her and lowered her gaze. As she occupied her seemingly usual seat at the front of the class, the strange behavior of whom Naruto remembered to be a smart, but very confident and frank girl, confused him for a moment. But he ignored it as part of the girl's puberty process, something he would not understand now and hoped not. Never understand. The other girls seemed to copy the actions of the last Uchiha, who seemed to have started fulminating Naruto with an eye to every opportunity. He assumed it was because the boy was suspicious. That Naruto had been present to see him break his usual coldness with his choice of reading. If he was asked about the Uchiha and his opinion about the boy, Naruto would simply reply that he disliked it because of the obvious attention he had received. To achieve the level of prodigy that everyone boasted about on the walls of Konoha. So far, he had seen the ninjutsu, cheating and evasion, stealth specialist teachers, and the fitness instructor give him additional one-on-one training during the class, to the detriment of those who really low. They needed, in addition to teaching him special movements and advanced techniques than ever before. They shared with the rest of the class. Only Iruka did not have any favors for him during the classes, and to Naruto's surprise, Elisha seemed to pay more attention in these, listening attentively and occasionally muttering questions at the end of the class to Iruka or the teacher. Assistant Mizuki. This apparent challenge to the very ones he seemed to realize he was receiving didn't stop it from happening. Naruto observed as the Genjutsu master went over the practical applications of the cancellation technique for the 12th time and less. After a month of teaching the subject, without even considering the idea of launching a Genjutsu, to have one thrown at them. The official position was that the academy did not want to use even the most basic forms of Genjutsu, as they could scare or leave emotional after effects on students before they were really ready to face life. Shinobi after graduation. If you ask Naruto, it's pure nonsense to appease civilians. If graduating genin did not get a Genjutsu specialist sensei, they would fall prey to the weaker Genjutsu launchers on their missions. Kage had spent almost 3 months throwing Genjutsu of various kinds at him to get him used to detecting the presence of Genjutsu due to the presence of alien chakra in your chakra system. Even with that combined experience, it was still a dilemma if Naruto had any idea that he was using a Genjutsu. And poor control caused him several problems to dispel them, even if he managed to detect them. But he stopped thinking about his shortcomings when the class bell rang, and the professor, whose name he had forgotten, and would probably never remember at the academy, finally stopped talking monotonously, and waved his hand disdainfully, as if he scares the class away so he won't be distracted anymore. Naruto would normally be annoyed by himself to be ignored, but the excitement for the next class overcame this reaction firmly, and he almost got fired from the classroom. The reason for his enthusiasm. The taijutsu class, of course. What else? During the last 3 weeks, they had gone through the advanced tastings of the academy's style of Konoha, which Naruto had not participated in, as he had his own style that he had been working on. The style of Uzumaki's Kage had told him that while torturing the boy in the first 4 tastings. With his absence, everyone assumed that he was no good at taijutsu at all, but Naruto didn't mind that one. To his position, even going so far as to bring his katana to classes to make it look like he was working on weapon dexterity, instead of hand-to-hand combat. If people had wrong ideas about his abilities, that would only help him if he had to face them for any reason. Something I had to keep in mind today, since it was the first session in which the members of the class would practice their skills physically. Although he wanted to prove himself against someone other than Kage, who crushed him with such conviction every time they trained. It was surprising that he had confidence in his ability. He wanted to maintain his abilities known to the minimum, so people wouldn't start talking about her strength being due to the fox trapped in her stomach. Therefore, he was hoping for an easy pairing today, as that would allow him to win convincingly without too much effort. Although he doubted that he would be so lucky, as he led the group towards the training ground where Iruka and Mizuki were waiting for them. Iruka spoke with a smile as he watched those in front of him. Afternoon class, I hope you are ready for this, your first observed battle. They will all face random opponents, and for the first 6 months, it will be boy against boy and girl against girl, until they have a little more experience. The rules are simple, only taijutsu, no ninjutsu, clan techniques, or chakra enhancements. The winner is the one who incapacitates his opponent or forces him out of the ring. As we progress, we will allow the use of techniques and weapons, and then we will have a tournament in the middle of the year. To determine the best taijutsu user of the year, after the Academy Field course and the simulated mission, of course. Do you understand? Everyone nodded, some visibly more eager for a fight than others. Mainly the boys and Nezuka and Uchiha were warming up and getting ready. Although from Sakura's look as she glared angrily at a couple of civilian girls, Iruka imagined that she was also eager to settle scores. Iruka then gestured to the side. If everyone who is not fighting can stay away from the ring, and not try to distract any of the fighters while the fight is going on, then they will be able to watch. If any of you cause problems from the band, you will be forced to wait inside. Now, the first 2 wrestlers of the afternoon. Iruka named 2 of the civilian boys, who entered the ring, greeting each other and forming academy poses. Iruka commented on each pose and what could be improved before starting the fight. The pair started cautiously, their initial exchange dominated by punches and kicks, before becoming increasingly involved in the fight. Despite Iruka's repeated exclamations for them to return to the correct posture, they gradually began to resume a more natural fight. That left them severely bruised, even before one of them managed to deal him hard punch in the face to the other, leaving him on the ground with a bloody nose. Iruka ended the fight, giving both of them a talk about the correct form and its uses before sending them to the infirmary for treatment. The next match was between Inoue Manaka and Ami, a match that the blonde dominated with moves that she had obviously learned from her family. Ami, on the other hand, showed an acceptable style, but it was obvious that she was not used to facing someone in combat. So she was easily confused by the different style she was facing. In less than 2 minutes, Ami fell backwards to the ground, while Iruka turned to give a talk to the class about the different styles they might face on the battlefield. Hino shook her hair with a selfish air before leaving the Rhine, amid the screams of several boys, visibly in love with her. Without thinking about it, Naruto walked over to the Rhine and headed towards the fallen girl, noticing out of the corner of his eye that they both chunnen. They stiffened in response, before Iruka continued as if nothing had happened. Ami seemed to be watching him intently, and shivered slightly when he reached out his hand to help her up. Before gingerly accepting it and getting up, she sat up quite tightly and clung to him before either of them noticed. A moment later, he was walking out of the ring with a choked-up thank you, his face as red as a tomato. There were murmurs throughout the class at this small interaction, although Naruto ignored the stares easily. After all, I've been doing it for as long as I can remember. 3 fights later, 2 of them had been dominated by the heirs of the main clan. Although the heir Nara was about to surrender at the beginning of their encounter, before Iruka reminded him that he would have informed his mother of the result. Naruto wondered if this class was completely against the civilians, who made up 2/3 of his group, since the clans had a clear advantage when it came to outside help. Then Iruka mentioned his name, and his attention returned to the scar Chunin. Yes, Iruka-sensei. Iruka sighed before repeating it. The 5th match, Naruto Uzumaki against Kiba and Nezuka, is what I said if you had been listening to me. Nodding to himself, as much as nodding to Iruka's statement, Naruto jumped up firm where he had been sitting, thinking, and returned to the ring. His opponent, a burly, wild-looking boy, had been accompanied everywhere by his dog. According to what Kage had told him, the Inuzuka were very proficient in taijutsu, especially with the techniques of their clan and their co-workers. Although he lacked both, Kiba was not to be underestimated, as it jumped forward as soon as Iruka began the combat, showing his teeth and with his nails elongated, almost like ready claws. Naruto started defensively, blocking the boy's sweeping attacks with his hands and dodging the powerful kicks. that were evidently looking to open up his defenses for the clawing attacks to take effect. If it wasn't for the fact that Cage had trained him very vigorously in taijutsu and endurance techniques throughout the training trip, Naruto knew that he probably would have been overwhelmed by the furious assault, but Change felt comfortable with his movements, deflecting them until an opening appeared in Kiba's defenses, which Naruto took advantage of a powerful palm strike that sent Kiba backward, gasping and clutching his stomach with one hand for a moment before recovering and take a stand one more time. The next attack was more cautious, and the two guys exchanged blows for the next 30 seconds. Kiba's resistance was beginning to falter as Naruto dealt one blow after another on the boy's guard, forcing him to retreat step by step. Naruto increased the intensity as Kiba approached the edge of the taijutsu line inside, to gain distance between the two fighters. With Kiba barely 2 steps off the edge, Naruto suddenly changed tactics, ducking down and throwing a hard kick. He hit the boy in the abdomen with a devastating kick that lifted him up into the air and took him out of the ring, falling to the ground with a strong blow. There was a moment of silence before this result, and Naruto knew that the most surprised were the Chunin. His academy report from his first 2 years said that he was terrible at taijutsu, but he had just destroyed one of the members of the taijutsu specialist clan in the class without even getting disheveled. The best thing for Naruto was that he had not even been forced to use the Uzumaki style, limiting himself to the punches, kicks and general stops that Cage had taught him as a precursor to the real style, which means that there was revealed nothing but some of his speed, strength and endurance, which was not very casual for anyone who didn't know him well. After finally coming out of the collective stupor, Iruka spoke as he rushed to check on the fallen boy. Winner by eviction from the Rhine, Naruto Uzumaki, Mizuki, continue the session from here. I have to take Kiba to the infirmary to be treated. He might have broken a couple of ribs on landing. Without saying anything else, he activated a shushin and disappeared from the training ground. Mizuki stepped forward and picked up Iruka's clipboard, which he had dropped, looking at the assigned pairs, while dismissing Naruto from the corner. A gesture of disdain. After remembering that if he had hurt his companion so much, Naruto would contain himself more in the future, Naruto left the Rhine and returned to his original position to the side. Unsurprisingly, he was respectfully ignored by the rest of the class after that demonstration, and a Cage lesson came to mind. It is good that both your allies and your enemies respect your power. That brings peace, but only your enemies should fear your power, lest your allies end up turning against you because of that fear. With that suddenly echoing in his head, Naruto interpreted it as a sign that he had probably overreacted with his new image, and that perhaps making an effort to get to know his peers wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. The problem was that, with the record that had been set, changing it suddenly would be very difficult to achieve in the short term. He kept thinking about the matter while the remaining battles were going on, with all the heirs of the clan winning comfortably, and the battles between civilians much closer in comparison. The only surprise was Sakura's match against one of the girls she had been glaring at. With a perfect taijutsu and amazing flexibility, Sakura pinned her opponent down quite painfully in less than a minute, before getting up in shame and apologizing quietly before leaving the arena sitting alone again, under the cold gaze of those who, obviously, were the defeated friends. Something was happening there that Naruto missed, that was for sure, although he wished to avoid trying to be friends with Sakura to begin with, in case she took it as a sign that he hadn't lost his crush on her and tried to going back to his old way of treating him, something Naruto would definitely not tolerate this time. The bell rang, signaling the end of the day, and Naruto took the opportunity to leave immediately, heading to the training ground that, for all he knew, had been disused for some time, or so he had discovered. While using it until now, he needed to think more about how to change his attitude so that he could become friends of at least some of his classmates. When jumping, Naruto did not notice the eyes that were watching him intently since he won his match. With great stealth, the owner of those eyes jumped on the roof after Naruto, determined to return the dobe to the place where he had been before his mysterious disappearance. For 2 years. His onyx-colored eyes glowed with determination and anger as the figure followed him at a prudent distance, Upon arriving at the training camp, Naruto started with some basic exercises before adopting the meditation pose. That cage had taught him to calm his chakra, which was quite upset. Taking a deep breath and clearing his mind, he was about to relax when he heard someone moving at the edge of the clearing where he was. Sharpening his ear, he noticed a familiar smell and frowned as he shouted irritably, "What are you doing here, Yuki-san?" Previously on Shades of Yuzu. When jumping, Naruto did not notice the eyes that were watching him intently since he won his match. With great stealth, the owner of those eyes jumped on the roof after Naruto, determined to return the dobe to the place where he had been before his mysterious disappearance during 2 years. His onyx-colored eyes glowed with determination and anger as the figure followed him at a prudent distance. Upon arriving at the training camp, Naruto started with some basic exercises before adopting the meditation pose. That cage had taught him to calm his chakra, which was quite upset. Taking a deep breath and clearing his mind, he was about to relax when he heard someone moving at the edge of the clearing where he was. Sharpening his ear, he noticed a familiar smell and frowned as he shouted irritably, "What are you doing here, Yuki-san?" Chapter 6, Confrontation. And after a few moments without response, Naruto was tempted to stand up, mainly to teach the boy manners, before hearing the inhalation and the quick movement that could only be associated with a technique. Jumping to the side, wide-eyed and furious, Naruto proved to be right an instant later, when the place where he had been sitting burst into flames. Staring at the dark-haired boy as he descended from the trees, Naruto growled his question as he adopted the first Uzumaki-style stance. A defensive one designed to expose the enemy to counterattacks with blockages and detours. "What the hell, Uchiha? I ask you a simple question, and you try to attack me. What a bad psychopath." For a second, Naruto thought he wouldn't get an answer and braced himself before the Uchiha finally spoke. "I'll tell you why if you beat me." And with that, he darted forward, covering the distance with surprising rapidity. Naruto was on the defensive, that was clear from the first exchanges. Although he was not as strong as Kiba, Sasuke made up for it with speed and skill. His taijutsu was very advanced and unknown to Naruto, probably a much more advanced version of the blade style that some chunin who adored him had taught him. He was very compact, and Sasuke didn't leave any openings as he pressed his attacks further and faster against Naruto's defenses. After a couple of minutes, Sasuke jumped back, seemingly more angry at Naruto than at first. "Why don't you fight?" the boy roared, before throwing to Tsunade with his left hand, running forward with 2 more prepared on the right. Naruto caught the first projectile and used it to deflect the second with a twist, facing his opponent again just in time to dodge the first cuts with the 2 kunai. Landing another kunai, Naruto adopted a more balanced style than the first one, and both of them threw punches back and forth for a minute. It was Sasuke who made the first mistake, visibly furious because of the situation. One of his punches with his left arm extended too far, allowing Naruto to disarm his sword with that hand, before flipping Lucia over with that hand on his back. Getting ahead of Lucia, Naruto stomped on her right wrist, which made her let go of the other crib, and with a scream. At the same time, Naruto directed one of his cribs at his neck, leaving him paralyzed, with fear reflected on his face. Breathing heavily after the best fight he had ever had with someone other than Kage, Naruto was still talking angrily to the one who had attacked him, almost tempted to activate the Kage clan technique that he had been taught by the Kage clan, the Mask of Shadows, just to increase the effect. "Now that I have your undivided attention, I'll ask you again, you little psycho, why did you attack me for no reason at all? And answer quickly, lest I lose patience. That won't end well for you." That provoked a reaction, and the Uchiha grunted at him. "You wouldn't dare, I'm the Uchiha," he interrupted when Naruto's sword slightly cut his throat. Something in his eyes started to change and glow red as Naruto responded with his most intimidating tone. "Try me, it would make my day, possibly my week. If I wanted to, no one would find your body." It was a calculated bluff on Naruto's part. He was just trying to knock the kid out and present him to the court, accused of attempted murder. But if the kid thought he was serious about the body, that was his problem. Counting down from 5, Naruto couldn't help but smile when after 3 seconds, Sasuke shouted at him in a rather feminine voice to stop. Although he guessed that it could well be the stress of the situation that had caused it. He pulled back his crib and stepped back, leaving Sasuke rubbing his throat. Be careful with the healthy hand. After a moment, Sasuke spoke in his usual hoarse voice. I wanted to know if today's combat with Kiba had been a fluke, or if the rumors that you had been kidnapped by a night demon and trained to possess a terrible power were true. As you are no longer the double you were before you left. The boy stopped talking, but the hint was obvious. Naruto laughed to himself. Kage would love to have earned the nickname Night Demon, in addition to all his other titles. So that's your defense for trying to kill me. You wanted to know if I had become much stronger. Sasuke shook his head before Naruto could reprimand him for his stupidity. If you had looked like you weren't going to move, I would have shot the fireball somewhere else. I'm not that stupid. The other reason was that you proved to be a real challenge. You don't hold back like everyone else, not wanting to hurt your precious Uchiha. I thought that if I fought against you, maybe I would get the lineage of my clan, which supposedly only wakes up in life and death situations. Looking at the boy's red eyes, each with a Tamo present forming part of the Naruto, had to admit that Lucia's surprisingly passionate speech made a lot of sense, especially since it seemed to have worked, although Lucia didn't seem to have noticed. Putting away one of his kunai, Naruto grabbed the small pocket mirror that Kage had insisted on carrying, to look around corners without exposing himself to detection. He offered it to Lucia and spoke with much more joy than before. Well, then you owe me a double for not planning to report this attack, and the other, a favor. Well, you'd better see for yourself. Looking at Naruto with confusion, obviously not understanding what he meant, Sasuke grabbed the mirror and observed him for an instant. Before an obvious understanding was reflected on his face and a smile was drawn on it. If Naruto hadn't expected the attack in response to this revelation, he wasn't sure he would have reacted in time to stop it. Sasuke was even faster now, and seemed bent on getting revenge on Naruto for his previous defeat. Naruto backed up step by step, pushed to the limit, while Sasuke seemed able to predict what he was about to do before he did it. He had already received 2 blows to the chest and a kick to the face, one of which had left his lip slightly bleeding. And that was before Sasuke returned to his idea of using 2 kunai. Knowing that he would not be able to properly defend himself with kunai alone, Naruto took advantage of the momentary pause in Sasuke's attack generated by reaching for his bag to back off of a leap and bring his hand to his sword. Kage was a short sword user, but he mastered most of the weapons that were considered easy to find in the elemental nations. Therefore, he had Naruto practice with various weapons to find out which one he felt most comfortable with before mainly training him in that gun. The result was the nodachi she was wearing tied around her waist. It was not a complete nodachi, shortened to fit Naruto's size and build, but the concepts behind its use were the same. Thus, Naruto concentrated on the first of the techniques that Kage had taught him, the only one in which Kage claimed to be acceptable. The lion's roar was a simple unsheathing technique that required great speed and a slight chakra boost. As Sasuke charged forward, Naruto unsheathed his sword with as much speed as possible, slashing first up and then down with a fluid motion, taking a step forward to extend the reach of the second strike. His speed was such that his own eyes could barely follow the blurred vision, and he knew where he was going. Somehow, Sasuke picked up the technique despite his speed, and tried to dodge the punches. He managed to avoid the first blow completely, although the second one went through his shirt and left a slight cut on his torso. Sasuke finished jumping backwards as Naruto sheathed his sword once more, hoping that the demonstration had brought him back to reality. However, his thoughts stopped when the breeze from the area picked up, moving Sasuke's shirt on both sides of his body, leaving Naruto staring in amazement at what was in front of him. Sasuke seemed ready to continue when he noticed Naruto staring blankly at him. Following Naruto's gaze, Sasuke immediately let go his 2 cribs, and he tried to close his t-shirt and protect himself from Naruto's gaze with a cry of surprise and shame, almost typical of a girl. However, the damage was already done, as demonstrated by Naruto's shocked exclamation a moment later. "Sasuke, why the hell do you have breasts?" Previously on the Shadows of Yuzu. Thus, Naruto concentrated on the first of the techniques that Kage had taught him, the only one in which Kage claimed to be acceptable. The lion's roar was a simple unsheathing technique that required great speed and a slight chakra boost. As Sasuke charged forward, Naruto unsheathed his sword with as much speed as possible, slashing first up and then down with a fluid motion, taking a step forward to extend the reach of the second strike. His speed was such that his own eyes could barely follow the blurred vision, and he knew where he was going. Somehow, Sasuke picked up the technique despite his speed, and tried to dodge the punches. He managed to avoid the first blow completely, although the second one went through his shirt and left a slight cut on his torso. Sasuke finished jumping backwards as Naruto sheathed his sword once more, hoping that the demonstration had brought him back to reality. However, his thoughts stopped when the breeze from the area picked up, moving Sasuke's shirt on both sides of his body, leaving Naruto staring in amazement at what was in front of him. Sasuke seemed ready to continue when he noticed Naruto staring blankly at him. Following Naruto's gaze, Sasuke immediately let go of his two cribs, and tried to close his t-shirt and protect himself from Naruto's gaze with a cry of surprise and shame, almost typical of a girl. However, the damage was already done, as demonstrated by Naruto's shocked exclamation a moment later. "Sasuke, why the hell do you have breasts?" Revelations of an unexpected kind. Naruto was silent after his exclamation, leaving them both silent for a moment, blushing for different reasons. Sasuke finally replied, spitting out fury. "I thought the answer would be obvious, even to you, Tobe." He interrupted himself as if realizing something, while Naruto suggested what the boy wanted to say. "It means that you are one of those weird guys, girls, that Iruka-sensei was teaching us about, Anema." While Naruto was silent, trying to remember the word that Iruka had used, Sasuke sputtered in embarrassment before yelling at him. "I'm not one of those things, I'm completely a woman, thank you very much." Sasuke then seemed to realize what he had said by shutting up with a soft pie, leaving Naruto trying to take in what he had just discovered. "But why are you hiding that you're a girl?" As he said that, Naruto remembered what he had heard a few days after his return, just before he started at the academy. Flashback scene. Jumping from roof to roof, trying to get acquainted with the village again. Naruto stopped when he saw a small crowd forming in one of the squares. As he jumped down, he was disappointed to discover that he was simply the Uchiha, going about his daily chores, with groups of girls discreetly following him. Just as he was about to jump again, he heard a man commenting to his wife, "I am very glad that our daughter is not interested in him, dear. That is, not only is he under the threat that his brother will return to finish the job, but in a few years, the council will start demanding that he rebuild his clan, and the Hokage has a limit to avoid being chosen marriages. Girls to be with if he doesn't find any by then. Although I guess it could be worse, at least he's a man." At that moment, Naruto had lost interest and had gone back to life. His exploration. End of the flashback. The realization hit him like a brick and he gasped before recovering. Before saying anything else, he unbuttoned the black jacket Kage had bought for him and offered it to Sasuke, whose expression quickly changed from rage to confusion. After a moment of nothing happening, Naruto spoke to clarify his action. "You can wear this, it'll be better for both of us if we talk, while you're not trying to cover up." Understanding showed on his face, and he took a step forward. Naruto looked away as she took it with a whisper of thanks. After a moment's pause, Sasuke spoke again. "I guess I'm in the terrible situation of being indebted to you now, Naruto-san, assuming you don't tell them my secret." When Naruto started to turn his head to answer, he found her hands holding his head. "I need you to answer a few more questions before I let you go around Naruto-san again, so I know if I can trust you." Naruto shrugged his shoulders, a surprisingly difficult action with a still head. "Whatever you say, Sasuke, what's wrong with the sand all of a sudden?" His answer contained a nuance of resignation. "I hope that if I show you a little more respect, It will help you decide to help me, but I can go back to Dobe if you prefer. Naruto-san. Now answer the question. Will you keep my secret? Well, that was a pretty easy question to answer, so he answered without hesitation. Of course it is, Sasuke-chan. I know why you're hiding now, and I wouldn't wish on anyone what would happen if you were found out, not even the idiot of the academy janitor. A giggle was heard, something that seemed so out of place in Naruto's mind with the Sasuke, he knew that it was disconcerting. At least we can agree on that point. My next question is, what do you want in return for your silence? That stumped him for a moment. What the hell was I talking about? Then he remembered a bad point he had mentioned during his diplomacy lessons. Everyone expects something for doing nothing. Ninjas expect a lot not to divulge secrets they know. It all comes down to the price both parties pay for revealing the secret they possess. With this in mind, Naruto decided that staying honest was the best tactic. Honestly, I don't want anything from you. I found out something, and it's important to keep it a secret. Otherwise, you will get into a good mess, and in a very difficult situation. I hope the same if someone finds out one of my secrets. That obviously surprised her, and he felt the hands holding her head pull back before. Of grabbing him by the shoulders and turning him to face her, eyes alight and the sharing and spinning. Really? I'll know if you're lying. It's one of the things the Sharingan helps me spot. He nodded vigorously. Of course, yes, you could give me anything I want. That provoked another look of disbelief in the girl, a disbelief that extended to her response. Apart from being the only heiress of a powerful and prestigious clan, whose coffers are still decently filled with the income from the shops that rent to me, I am amazed at the lack of possibilities you have in this situation. Well, it was official. Regardless of his gender, Sasuke had a way of making Naruto feel completely dumb, something he liked to think wasn't that easy. He arched an eyebrow inquisitively. Would it be easier for you to accept if I asked you for something? Because if this takes much longer, probably not. We'll get in trouble with the Ambo patrols when we try to get home. At that moment, she blushed and quickly released him. You're right, I should be grateful to you for your generosity, but here I'm trying to force you to accept something. I won't try it again, I swear, but I have a question. Question, would you grant it to me? After being attacked, yelled at, attacked again and then interrogated, being asked a question was a relief for Naruto. Of course, Sasuke-chan, as long as it's not too ridiculous, chuckled once more before walking away from him. First of all, my name is Saki. No Sasuke, and secondly, since I'm the only person of our generation who knows the truth about me, I need your opinion. He moved his hands, but since his back was to him, Naruto couldn't understand what he was doing before he turned around again. With a light and funny tone. My haircut makes me less attractive. It was going like this, I should take it longer. Naruto was struggling to stay conscious as he watched Saki. Obviously, he had dispelled some technique, but his face had changed. The changes were not great in themselves, his cheekbones a little higher, his jaw less defined, his face in general a little narrower, but when combined, you seem to be looking at another person. In addition, her hair, which was previously slightly up and to the sides, now fell flat, leaving her with a very attractive face. And hair that covered her ears, but not beyond, in a surprising appearance. Flattering. She laughed again, and the smile changed her face even more. If someone had told him that this girl was the real Sasuke, he would have told him that he was crazy. I didn't think it was possible to blow you away, Naruto-san. I thought it came naturally to you. The insult was obviously a joke, so Naruto managed not to overreact, which was probably what she wanted at that moment. Instead, he turned his gaze to something else. I guess you dispelled some technique by turning around, but the chakra expenditure would be too much for you to keep it all day. So some kind of seal, I guess. His insight surprised her, that was obvious, but she nodded, and then unbuttoned the top of his jacket, revealing a seal that he had on his shoulders, on the front of his torso. Naruto tried to cover his eyes, but stopped when she yelled at him. Don't bother, it's nothing you haven't already seen, so there's no point in feeling embarrassed after your little drooling session earlier. She blushed, it was true. The image of Sasuke's small but growing chest was firmly ingrained in his mind. and he doubted that he would be able to take it off for quite a while. Not that I'd want to, though. Lowering his hand, he approached and began to observe the seal carefully, marveling at its complexity. Cage had only covered the basics of stamping, being an amateur who could only create the most basic stamps he needed. But he had told Naruto that the Uzumaki were famous for their ability to seal, and thus began Naruto's fascination with the subject. Drawing a line that he believed connected two of the important functions, the charging and the storage, he noticed that Saki shuddered slightly. And not only from his touch. Darkness was fast approaching, and with the clear sky typical of Konoha summer nights, the temperature would drop quickly. With a sigh, she stepped back, grabbed the zipper of her jacket, and pulled it up, covering Saki once more. Although she kept protesting, saying that she could do it alone. As much as I'd love to find out how that stamp works and all its secrets, it's getting late. And you'd better get back quick before the Zambus show up in droves. The last thing we want is for them to find you like this. She nodded, but seemed a little worried. The problem is that the label needs more time to charge before I can activate it again. And if I use an eng, they might detect it and think I'm a possible infiltrator, which is even worse. Naruto smiled reassuringly at him before taking his hand. Don't worry about that, Saki-chan. I have a technique that will allow us to enter the Uchiha complex. I just need you to hold me tight and close your eyes. You really don't want them to open up to you with this. She stared at him for a moment before sighing and reaching out to hug him. This better not be an excuse for you to touch me, or you'll regret it, I swear. With the threat, she closed her eyes and leaned her head on his shoulder with a grimace. Deciding not to wait a second so she wouldn't think he was trying to get aroused, he held his hands up behind her back, forming one seal after another with meticulous precision. The technique was another of Cage's, and although he used it, it was one of the most chakra-consuming techniques for the masked man. It worked by throwing the user, and everyone and everything that was attached to him, into a parallel dimension, composed essentially of shadows and fire. Then he would bring them back to the place Naruto had been thinking about, one of the courtyards in the Uchiha complex there. He had seen while exploring. The technique was very fluid, although it required an enormous amount of energy, both to transport the mass of the user, and whoever was with him, and to erect a chakra shield around him to deter the inhabitants of the alternate realm of trying to eat them. After a few moments without him moving, Naruto realized that Saki probably hadn't noticed that he had moved. Looking down, he was surprised to see a relatively gentle smile on the girl's face. And, reluctant to break it, he knew it was better to get it inside before a patrol car passed by. Saki-chan, you can open your eyes now, we're here. She opened them slowly, before realizing he was looking at her. She jumped away, her cheeks flushed, even as she resumed a neutral expression. Having done this, he looked around, and realized that he was right, and that he had moved. He turned to Naruto, watching him with an appraising gaze that sent a slight shiver down his spine. Awesome technique, Naruto-san. You know you're going to teach me that technique one way or another. Naruto shook his head. I'm afraid I can't do that, Saki-chan. I promised my teacher that I would only teach these techniques to my family. After all, they are all that's left of my village. Well, instead of discouraging her, that line of defense seemed to excite her even more, judging by the predatory smile. She mumbled something he didn't catch before she gave herself. Turn around and point. But enough about the technique for now. I'm sure we can negotiate it later. My house is around here, and I would like you to join me before you leave. Deciding to joke around a bit at that moment, Naruto spoke in a mocking tone as he walked beside her, surprised when she slipped his hand in his gently before squeezing it slightly. Oh, how sweet, Saki-chan. With this and your expression from before when you arrived, anyone could think that you liked her. He stopped when he saw that she was giving him a look that promised pain if he kept talking about the subject, and wisely put her aside before getting into more trouble. So they walked through the district in silence, through well-kept gardens and streets, before approaching a large three-story house on the edge of the complex, near one of the gates leading to the rest of Konoha. This is where I live now. It used to be a warehouse that I never entered, so after everything that happened, at least, there are no memories that haunt me. Not knowing what other reaction Naruto settled for a reassuring smile as he squeezed her hand to reassure her. A Sasuke with feelings would take some getting used to, but he was better than the Sasuke from before. That's for sure. Well, Saki-chan, you know where I am, and my door is always open if you need me. But if I do or say something stupid, will you kill me fast, please? He asked, smiling again with a sneer as he teased. Don't count on it, Tobe. I'll torture you all I want, and you won't complain in the slightest. She paused before looking at him seriously again. But seriously, thank you, Naruto, not only for keeping the secret from me. It's refreshing to finally have someone my age to talk to, even if he's a stinky kid. Obviously, he said the latter in jest, but he still pretended to be offended in an exaggerated way. What a bad smell. The good lady hurts me with her words. She laughed, another thing he would have to adjust to, before squeezing her hand one last time and turning towards the door. He turned the key he took out of his bag and opened the door while screaming once more. Good night, Naruto. See you tomorrow at the same training camp after the academy. You have already proved to be more useful than those buffoons who claim to be our teachers. With that said, he left, leaving Naruto alone in the courtyard, his mind still in a whirl. From the enormous amount of information he had assimilated in the last few hours. Finally determined to return home, he assumed that there was something good in the evening, at least. He had become friends with one of his companions, even if he was not allowed to tell anyone. Previously in Yuzu's shadow, he turned the key he took out of his bag and opened the door, while shouting once more. Good night, Naruto. See you tomorrow at the same training camp after the academy. You have already proved to be more useful than those buffoons who claim to be our teachers. With that said, he left, leaving Naruto alone in the courtyard, his mind still in a whirl. From the enormous amount of information he had assimilated in the last few hours. Finally determined to return home, he assumed that there was something good in the evening, at least. He had become friends with one of his companions, even if he was not allowed to tell anyone. Chapter 8. A Progress of a Kind. The next week passed relatively quickly for Naruto, developing a slow routine as he went along. After the surprise with Saki, he had decided not to try to make friends with another person in his class, until he had resolved his stance regarding the girl in disguise. He also had a new project to work on, since after the first night they had spent training together. Using only taijutsu, of course, for now, although Saki had shown interest in learning how to use a sword as Naruto, I had asked him to take another look at his stamp so I could copy it. She smiled smugly before asking him if he was just trying to undress her again, leaving him red with excitement before agreeing to show him. He ran the top of his t-shirt so that he could see it, and, grabbing parchment and pen, he set to work tracing the lines and scribbles that formed the seal in front of him. It had taken him half an hour to copy it to his satisfaction, and afterwards Saki had insisted that he owed her his patience regarding that little session, something he had recognized quite easily. She hadn't claimed that favor yet, though he was sure she still had something on her mind. It was like her not to tell him what she had planned. The seal had taken up most of Naruto's free time when he wasn't with Sasuke or training alone. And he still had no idea how it worked, most of it without destroying Saki's chakra system. He had gone to the shinobi library after asking her to cage about seals, and that this one pointed him in that direction, although the books that he could borrow as a non-ninja were of little help to him, beyond teaching him the rules of sealing, something that Cage did not know at all. Speaking of Cage, I had received a letter from the man through the courier service he operated through the elementary nations. He thought that the girl he had found was actually an Uzumaki, but she was also a grass genin, and seemed to have a sensor, as she could detect his presence even when using her shadow techniques, and according to her, her chakra. It was too dark to be reliable, whatever that meant. Obviously, she had also informed her superiors, since after the first 2 attempts at contact, they had put her under surveillance. Cage had said that he would make one more attempt before returning to Konoha, with the idea of taking Naruto to the grass during Christmas, hoping Naruto would have more luck talking to her. Although he was not opposed to the idea, Naruto knew that it would be fun to persuade the Hokage to allow them to travel from Konoha, since he had just returned. But for now, everything was just a hypothesis. Returning to reality, He looked up from his work to observe Saki, who was lying on the grass near him, reading her book. One that, according to her, belonged to a series that her mother liked in life. Obviously, she was enjoying it too, since at the end of the day's training, she asked if she could sit with her while she read. Something he didn't mind, as he was just going to work at the label once more, so the location didn't matter too much. He now had more than a dozen copies of the stamp, all of them, except the original, covered with his drawings and doodles. He smiled as he read something in the book before looking. Staring at him, staring into his eyes. Neither of them flinched for an instant, although Saki's smile didn't fade in the slightest. After a moment, he looked away and tried to put the situation behind him with a question. Naruto-kun, I know you disappeared for 2 years, and you obviously trained with a teacher during that time. Do you think he could teach me something? He paused and quickly continued before Naruto could say anything. Nothing related to your clan or anything, but with my brother out there, I need to get stronger a lot faster. If I want to beat him when the time comes. During the last week, they had tentatively talked about Saki's brother and, of course, about the massacre he had caused. Saki revealed that she still received monthly advice from Ino's father on the subject, but it didn't seem to help her at all. Obviously, revealing such a weakness to her made her vulnerable, so Naruto did his best to make her not think that she could take advantage of it at some point. However, the whole conversation seemed to have helped, since now she could talk about her brother with Bagheera without suffering the old flashbacks. Although she was still caught in the most unexpected moments. Paralyzed when hearing a child's laughter or seeing a pattern of leaves on the ground. Naruto liked to think he was helping her through it, but with how shattered she was after each event. He wondered if trying to get her to open up was making the situation better or worse. He decided to tear her from his memories with good news. In the worst case, he would have to put pressure on Cage to do it, but he doubted that he would have to go that far. Of course, he will be able to teach you some things, especially if you still want to use a sword. My only caveat would be that you'd have to tell her. He shook himself for a moment before shrugging his shoulders. I expected it already, and besides, if he keeps training you when he comes back, I won't be left behind if he trains me too. Naruto didn't make any comment, but they both understood that that was the real reason why Saki wished to train with Cage. With the amount of his fans among the shinobi population, it wouldn't have been difficult for him to receive training from them. But he would have to do it as Sasuke, a personality who had finally managed to admit that he didn't enjoy following. Even if it would make things easier in the village. He nodded slowly before picking up his work. It was getting dark, and I still had to take Saki home. Standing up, she heard Saki imitate her with a sigh of disappointment. She had long since stopped pretending that she disliked having to be with him, although sometimes she still complained jokingly. After putting his work away, he turned to see Saki advancing, hugging slowly at him as he activated his shadow teleportation technique again, appearing at the entrance of Saki's renovated house. As Naruto tried to pull away, Saki looked at him while hugging him again. Her silent plea made him sigh, feigning distress before returning the hug. They stayed like that for a minute, before finally she turned away smiling at him. Naruto-kun, I have a request to make to you. When she said it, she drew him inside the house, so he assumed it couldn't be that serious. 2 weeks time jump, that little request over there. The road to Naruto's transition to the Uchiha house 3 nights a week. Saki had asked him to stay in the guest room, which was next to hers and connected by a private bathroom. The reason for this request quickly became apparent after Naruto reluctantly agreed and returned home. From looking for bedding, the two stayed up by the fire in the living room, drinking hot chocolate and chatting quietly, until Saki fell asleep on his shoulder with a firm smile on her face. He just sat there for a while, enjoying the presence of someone his age who he felt completely like. With his presence, finally he got up and took the girl to his bed, tucking her in before returning to his temporary room. He had barely been asleep for an hour when he heard the screams and cries from the next room. She ran through the bathroom, katana in hand, and found Saki in a nightmare, tossing and turning on the bed, screaming unintelligibly at someone. Upon waking her up, she realized who he was before throwing herself on him, crying piteously. It turned out that he had nightmares every other night, and that after them he would not be able to sleep anymore that night. She hoped that Naruto's presence nearby would help her, but it didn't seem to take effect. So they talked some more, and Saki revealed that she hadn't even told Hino's father anything about the nightmares, thinking that they made her look even weaker than she already was. Naruto comforted her for a while longer and, without her noticing, she fell asleep in his arms again. With no other way out but for the girl to wake up, he resigned himself to her hitting him in the morning, and fell asleep. The two woke up to Saki's alarm clock, which announced the academy, without having moved at all during the night. This was all that Saki needed to prove to herself that Naruto was a painkiller for her nightmares, and therefore, she asked him to stay with her from now on. Naruto eventually came to an agreement with her staying every night, arguing that, once they graduated, she might not be available every night and that they had to try to help Saki get over it herself. According to Saki, it was having some effect. The nightmares were less frequent, even when he was away. And sometimes he could fall back asleep when he woke up. The other reason Naruto argued this was that he knew that Kage would take him out of the village for the next year. At least once, if not several, and that, at first, he would not let Saki travel with them. It's not that the Hokage allowed to such valuable targets to leave the village unsupervised. Although that wouldn't be for a while, it seemed, judging by the coded information Kage had put in his last letter to Naruto, which he had received the day he failed to make any progress. Regarding the Genin Kusa, Kage had turned his attention to the rumors of a group of slavers claiming to be able to give their customers lineage users of various varieties, one of which sounded like he might belong to the clan brother of Wolpal, the appropriately named Oni clan, who could summon and control various small and minor demons to serve them in battle and in missions. With this news, it was clear to Naruto that he would have to perform an original training on his own, while Kage was busy, since he had almost completed all the exercises that he had left for him when they separated at the border of the Country of Fire. I was sure I could ask the Hokage. A man with your experience could certainly help you with some of the things you had difficulties with. But for now, he decided to think about that idea later. The academy bell announcing the end of the day had just rung, and seeing Sasuke disappear from his seat and walk through the door made it clear that Saki wanted to start training as soon as possible. The reason for this was probably the discussion of the day, which happened to be about the prominent clans of the village, and which obviously included a talk about the Uchiha clan. Several of her fans had spent the session cooing to her alter ego about the tragedy of her family having disappeared, something that had led to Lucia about to berate them for their lack of tact. But he didn't have much to worry about in that regard. Saki was heading to the complex while getting rid of her pursuers and fans. She would transform into her female form when she was conveniently hidden from prying eyes, and then head to the training camp that they had practically claimed as his, away from the village, where anyone who wasn't a ninja could come. So, even with her initial advantage in the run to the meeting point, it would take almost an hour to reach the training ground in question. More than enough time for her to calm down a little before he trained with her. That's what I was hoping for, anyway. The girl was now as fast as him without using her Sharingan, and as such, she could hurt him quite a bit when she was angry. He also felt very little guilt for the harm he did to her after he had discovered her healing ability, claiming that, after all, he was helping her ability to improve, which was always a good thing. Well, he suspected that the reason was actually that she still wanted to make sure that he didn't consider her weak in any way, although she wished that he wouldn't feel the need to break her nose every chance he got in a workout. To prove it, with time in his favor, he spent 10 minutes watching the rest of his class slowly disappear into the usual hustle and bustle of Konoha, typical of the main village, before leaving for the training camp at a slow jog and jumping over the roofs, which would allow him to think while moving, without much risk of bumping into something by accident and getting embarrassed, as I had seen several fans do of Sasuke while they were trying to chase the boy on the way home. What Naruto didn't know is that, for once, he was the one being followed on the way to the training camp. His relaxed senses and attitude weakened the sixth sense that Kage had tried to instill in him, and made him oblivious to the threat that was stalking him. Previously in Yuzu's shadow, he turned the key he took out of his bag and opened the door, while shouting once more, "Good night, Naruto. See you tomorrow at the same training camp after the academy. You have already proved to be more useful than those buffoons who claim to be our teachers." With that said, he left, leaving Naruto alone in the courtyard, his mind still in a whirl from the enormous amount of information he had assimilated in the last few hours. Finally determined to return home, he assumed that there was something good in the evening, at least. He had become friends with one of his companions, although he did not allow him admit to telling anyone. Chapter 8. A Progress of a Kind. The next week passed relatively quickly for Naruto, developing a slow routine as he went along. After the surprise with Saki, he had decided not to try to make friends with another person of his kind, until he had resolved his real position about the girl in the costume. He also had a new project to work on, since after the first night they had spent training together, using only taijutsu, of course, for now, although Saki had shown interest in learning how to use a sword as Naruto, I had him asked to take another look at his stamp to be able to copy it. She smiled smugly before asking him if he was just trying to undress her again, leaving him red with excitement before agreeing to show him. He ran the top of his t-shirt so that she could see it and, grabbing parchment and pen, set to work tracing them, lines and squiggles that formed the seal in front of him. It had taken him half an hour to copy it to his satisfaction, and afterwards Saki had insisted that he owed her his patience regarding that little session, something he had recognized quite easily. She had not yet claimed that favor, although I was sure he still had something on his mind. It was like her not to tell him what she had planned. The seal had taken up most of Naruto's free time when he wasn't with Sasuke or training alone, and he still had no idea how it worked, most of it without destroying Saki's chakra system. He had gone to the shinobi library after asking Lokai about stamps and having him point him in that direction. Although the books he could borrow as a non-ninja were of little help beyond teaching him the rules of the sealed, something that Kage was completely unaware of. Speaking of Kage, he had received a letter from the man through the courier service that operated through the elemental nations. He thought that the girl he had found was actually an Uzumaki, but she was also a grass genin and seemed to have a sensor, as she could detect his presence even when using her shadow techniques, and according to her, her chakra. It was too dark to be reliable, whatever that meant. Obviously, she had also informed her superiors, since after the first 2 attempts at contact, they had put her under surveillance. Kage had said that he would make one more attempt before returning to Konoha, with the idea of taking Naruto during Christmas to the grass, hoping that Naruto would have more luck talking to her. Although he was not opposed to the idea, Naruto knew that it would be fun to persuade the Hokage to allow them to travel from Konoha, since he had just returned. But for now, it was all just an idea. Hypothesis. Returning to reality, he looked up from his work to observe Saki, who was lying on the grass near him, reading her book. One that, according to her, belonged to a series that her mother liked in life. She obviously enjoyed it too, as after the day's training was over, she asked if she could sit with her while she read. Something she didn't mind, as she was just going to work on the stamp one more time, so the location didn't matter too much. He now had more than a dozen copies of the stamp, all of them, except the original, covered with his drawings and doodles. She smiled as she read something in the book, before staring at him, staring into his eyes. Neither of them flinched for an instant, although Saki's smile didn't fade in the slightest. After a moment, he looked away and tried to put the situation behind him with a question. Naruto-kun, I know that you disappeared for 2 years, and that you obviously trained with a master during that time. Do you think he could teach me something? He paused and quickly continued before Naruto could say anything. Nothing related to your clan or anything, but with my brother out there, I need to get stronger. Much faster if I want to beat him when the time comes. During the last week, they had tentatively talked about Saki's brother and, of course, about the massacre he had caused. Saki revealed that she still received monthly advice from Hino's father on the subject, but it didn't seem to help her at all. Obviously, revealing such a weakness to her made her vulnerable, so Naruto did his best to make her not think that she could take advantage of it at some point. However, the whole conversation seemed to have helped, as she could now talk about her brother vaguely without suffering the old flashbacks. Although she was still caught at the most unexpected moments, paralyzed by hearing a child's laughter or seeing a pattern of leaves on the ground. Naruto liked to think he was helping her through it, but with how shattered she was after each event, he wondered if trying to get her to open up was getting better or worse. The situation. He decided to tear her from his memories with good news. In the worst case, he would have to put pressure on Cage to do it, but he doubted that he would have to go that far. Of course, he will be able to teach you some things, especially if you still want to use a sword. My only caveat would be that you'd have to tell her. He shook himself for a moment before shrugging his shoulders. I expected it already, and besides, if he keeps training you when he comes back, I won't be left behind if he trains me too. Naruto didn't make any comment, but they both understood that that was the real reason for life. The Kesaki wanted to train with Cage. With the amount of his fans among the shinobi population, it wouldn't have been difficult for him to receive training from them. But he would have to do it as Sasuke, a personality who had finally managed to admit that he didn't enjoy following. Even if it would make things easier in the village. He nodded slowly before picking up his work. It was getting dark, and I still had to take Saki home. Standing up, she heard Saki imitate her with a sigh of disappointment. She had long since stopped pretending that she disliked having to be with him, although sometimes she still complained jokingly. After putting her work away, she turned to see Saki advancing, slowly hugging him. As he activated his shadow teleportation technique again, appearing at the entrance of Saki's renovated house. As Naruto tried to pull away, Saki looked at him while hugging him again. Her silent plea made him sigh, feigning distress before returning the hug. They stayed like that for a minute, before finally she turned away smiling at him. Naruto-kun, I have a request to make to you. When she said it, she drew him inside the house, so he assumed it couldn't be that serious. A 2-week time jump, that small request paved the way for Naruto's transition to the Uchiha house 3 nights a week. Saki had asked him to stay in the guest room, which was next to hers and connected by a private bathroom. The reason for this request became apparent quickly afterwards. After Naruto reluctantly agreed and returned home from getting some bedding, the two stayed up by the fire in the living room, drinking hot chocolate and chatting quietly until Saki fell asleep in her shoulder with a firm smile on his face. He just sat there for a while, enjoying life, of the presence of someone his age who was completely comfortable with his presence. Finally, he got up and took the girl to his bed, tucking her in before returning to his temporary room. He had barely been asleep for an hour when he heard the screams and cries from the next room. She ran through the bathroom, katana in hand, and found Saki in a nightmare, tossing and turning on the bed, screaming unintelligibly at someone. Upon waking her up, she realized who he was before throwing herself on him, crying piteously. It turned out that he had nightmares every other night, and that after them, he would not be able to sleep anymore that night. She hoped that Naruto's presence nearby would help her, but it didn't seem to take effect. So they talked some more, and Saki revealed that she hadn't even told Hino's father anything about the nightmares, thinking that they made her look even weaker than she already was. Naruto comforted her for a while longer and, without her noticing, she fell asleep in his arms again. With no other way out but for the girl to wake up, he resigned himself to her hitting him in the morning, and fell asleep. The two woke up to Saki's alarm clock, which announced the academy, without having moved at all during the night. This was all Saki needed to prove to herself that Naruto was a painkiller for her nightmares, and therefore asked him to stay with her from now on. Naruto eventually came to an agreement that he would stay every night, arguing that, once they graduated, he might not be available every night, and that they had to try to help Saki get through it herself. According to Saki, it was having some effect. The nightmares were less frequent, even when he was away, and sometimes he could fall back asleep when he woke up. The other reason Naruto argued this was that he knew that Cage would take him out of the village for the next year, at least once if not several, and that, at first, he would not let Saki travel with them. It's not that the Hokage allowed to such valuable targets to leave the village unsupervised. Although that wouldn't be for a while, he seemed to judge from the coded information that Cage had put in his last letter to Naruto. which he had received the day he made no progress regarding the gene on Kusa. Cage had turned his attention to the rumors of a group of slavers that they claimed to be able to give their customers lineage users of various varieties, one of which it sounded like he might belong to Walpol's sister clan, the very appropriately named clan, that they could summon and control various small and minor demons to serve them in battle and in missions. With this news, it was clear to Naruto that he would have to perform an original training on his own, while Cage was busy, since he had almost completed all the exercises that he had left for him when they separated at the border of the Country of Fire. I was sure I could ask the Cage. A man with your experience could certainly help you with some of the things you had difficulties with. But for now, he decided to think about that idea later. The academy bell announcing the end of the day had just rung, and seeing Sasuke disappear from his seat and walk through the door made it clear that Saki wanted to start training as soon as possible. The reason for this was probably the discussion of the day, which happened to be about the prominent clans of the village, and which obviously included a talk about the Uchiha clan. Several of her fans had spent the session cooing to her alter ego about the tragedy of her family having disappeared, something that had led to Lucia about to berate them for their lack of tact. But he didn't have much to worry about in that regard. Saki would head to the compound while getting rid of her pursuers and fans, transform into her female form, when she was conveniently hidden from prying eyes, and then head to the training camp that they had practically claimed as their own, far from the village, where anyone who wasn't a ninja could come to Osmir. So, even with her initial advantage in the run to the meeting point, it would take almost an hour to reach the training ground in question. More than enough time for her to calm down a little before he trained with her. That's what I was hoping for, anyway. The girl was now as fast as him without using her Sharingan, and as such, she could hurt him quite a bit when she was angry. He also felt very little guilt for the harm he did to her after he had discovered her healing ability, claiming that she was there after all, helping his skill improve, which was always a good thing. He suspected the reason was actually that she still wanted to make sure he didn't think of her as weak in any way, although she wished he wouldn't feel the need to break her nose every chance he got in a workout to prove it. With time in her favor, she spent 10 minutes observing the rest of her class slowly disappear into the usual bustle of Konoha, typical of the main village, before leaving for the training camp, to a slow jog and jumping over rooftops, which would allow him to think while moving without much risk of bumping into something by accident, and to be embarrassed, as he had seen several Sasuke fans do as they tried to chase the boy on the way home. What Naruto didn't know is that, for once, he was the one being followed on the way to the training camp. His relaxed senses and attitude weakened the sixth sense that Cage had tried to instill it and made him oblivious to the threat that stalked him. Sakura was having a bad week, if not a bad month, being honest with herself. Since the new boy's arrival at the school at the beginning of the year, he had hoped to earn his support, but his attitude, as well as what he had done to Kiba, they had given her more than enough reasons to be more cautious in her approach instead of just approaching him and seeing if he remembered her, especially after having thrown a crib at him and accidentally showing up in his class. It was certainly difficult to remember the annoying but cheerful blonde who had fawned over her when they were more young, is when he looked back around a fireplace he had been hiding behind when the guy in the black cape he was following looked around almost cautiously once more before heading to what he obviously believed to be a quiet place. The reason I was following him was a bit selfish if I was honest with myself. While the academy had started well for her, getting high test scores, and being selected to be part of the senior class in her academy year, while increasing her chances of being placed on a strong genin team when she graduated, she also discovered that many of her friends from the preschool, they were jealous of her now, not only because of the extra training and special teaching she received as part of the class, but also resented her for being able to brag at their meetings that she could talk and train with the most attractive guys in the class, like Kaibai, of course, Sasuke. Over time, they began to be more cruel to her in their chats, and it soon became clear that she was not welcome back in their group of friends. It would have been fine with Sakura because she had known for a long time that children could be fickle about such things. if she hadn't already fallen out with her best friend from class, Hino Yamanaka. A stupid competition to try to get the ucha. So there I was, a year and a half at the academy with the best female score in the theory exams, and suddenly, friendless and alone. Both at school and outside it, I wasn't much better. She hid it well from her family, as they would only worry and put even more pressure on her. That's why he followed his classmate as he did now, mainly to avoid having to go home too early and pretend to his parents that he had been with friends. The other reason was more of a hopeful wish than anything else. She had to admit that she was disturbed by the idea that she was following him so that he would catch her. As long as he didn't react brusquely, it would give her the perfect opportunity to talk to him, away from everyone trying to dissuade him from befriending the big-headed geek, as he had recently heard her call some of his old friends. It would definitely be nice to talk to someone like a close friend again, jumping in again to try and keep up with Naruto. He found them jumping towards the northern tip of Konoha, far beyond where he had been in his entire life, heading to the right slope of Okage Mountain and into the training camps that made up that area of Konoha. As she passed through some of the closest training areas, Sakura found it increasingly difficult to stay hidden while Naruto was passing by. And she was almost sure that she already knew that someone was following him. But they reached their apparent destination without incident, and Naruto was standing in the wide clearing, pacing and doing some basic exercises, while Sakura watched silently from the side. Normally, he would leave at that time. I had been following people long enough to know that getting caught watching them train was worse than just while they were traveling. But something about the exercises, what she was doing, the way they flowed so fluidly from one pose to another, with Naruto seemingly straining, captivated her in a way that attracted her. She was about to risk everything, get out of where she was hiding, and run to him, damn the consequences, when she felt someone grab her tightly and was holding his right arm behind his back. She was about to struggle and try to scream for help when she felt something cold and sharp against her neck, which paralyzed her, not even daring to breathe. Naruto continued with his exercises, oblivious to his plight, while she and whoever was holding her remained silent for a moment before she plucked up the courage to try to speak. "Please, I didn't mean to hurt you." He was interrupted with a groan of pain when he saw that his arm was painfully twisted a little further back. But Naruto's head went towards where they were, getting stiff before disappearing in an instant. Sakura wasn't sure if she should be relieved or more worried when Naruto spoke behind her back and the arm wrench loosened slightly. "Do you know? When I texted you saying I was being followed and we needed a plan, that wasn't exactly what I meant." There was silence, except for the slight movement of the figure holding her, before Naruto spoke, this time more insistently. "No, let her go, don't make me take you away from her. We will give you the opportunity to explain yourself first of all. And definitely no kunai on the neck with one of my classmates, that's totally forbidden, even if she tried to throw a kunai at me on the first day of school." That made Sakura blush, even when the figure let go of her hand and took the kunai from her, as he pushed her forward against the tree. The one who had been hiding. I knew that would happen at some point. When he turned around, he found himself looking at Naruto, and a girl of his same height, with short black hair, dark eyes, and a short kimono that seemed made for both battle and everyday wear, judging by the ease of movement, and the silence that had invaded them. The girl seemed to be furious, although for some reason she restrained herself so as not to speak. Naruto seemed to sense the tension and stepped forward, smiling politely at Sakura, hoping it was an easy way to diffuse the situation. "Don't worry, Sakura, she's an old friend of mine who's very protective of me, and well, with you sneaking up on me, she's a little nervous." His smile faded a little, and he looked at her earnestly for a moment before continuing. "Now, could you explain to me what you were doing?" Sakura swallowed saliva before bowing her head, hoping it would be perceived as an apology and respect. He could deal with Naruto alone, but it was the protective psychopath that worried him much more. "Well, Naruto-san, this is going to sound a little weird, but please listen to me. Naruto Uzumaki." Looking at the girl who was dozing in front of him, Naruto couldn't help but shake his head, amused at the story that had just been told to him. As for reasons to stalk, the idea of doing it just to hang out and cheat on his family was not something he had ever expected. From the girl he remembered from back in the day, an unladylike growl was heard. To her right, where Saki was leaning against a tree, still frowning. I'm glad you think it's funny, Naruto-kun, considering he almost went on the rampage because of your chivalry. If only you hadn't been so quick with your nonsense about me being Kai's daughter-in-law, tasked with taking care of you while he's away. I dare not think of the possibilities. What would have happened if I had somehow connected him to Sasuke? Naruto shook his head as he stood up to stretch his muscles. Well, I apologize, Carrie. But it was the best thing I had at that time, and to be honest, if we clarify it with the Okage and the cage, it is a perfect cover. No one would question you for hanging around. That cleared his frown, and he thought about it for a moment before nodding approvingly. Yes, it might be for the best, and it will prevent Sakura-chan from doing more research than she should in the near future. What are you going to do with her? He decided not to comment on the usual way of addressing Saki despite his apparent dislike for the girl, and instead looked at her with a questioning look that made her shake her head and chuckle. Don't look at me like that, you idiot. I know you well enough already. I could see how I know you. She moved her heart as she told her sad story. He stopped smiling and looked at her incredulously at the hint. You're insinuating that you're leaving her here and pretending that this never happened.